There is one thing worse than death. The Little Pyramid Game. What would you do to achieve the life of your dreams? Probably more than you'd care to admit. You may be tempted to have your wishes granted by a mysterious game, should you happen upon it. Or should it happen upon you. You may come to find, as I did, that temptation can do a lot worse than kill you. The story of my ill-fated journey is long and short, and neither. That will only make sense to you once I have finished. If you haven't the stomach for it, then do as I ask before you continue with your life. Don't ever play the Little Pyramid Game. Life as I knew it ended during the summer of 2010, whilst I was honeymooning in Egypt with my wife Nadine. Gazing at the horizon from the balcony of our hotel in Giza, we saw the pyramids jutting upwards like lower teeth. The sandy gum of the desert proudly brandished those brown fangs against the sky's blue jaws above. I think anyone who has visited those monoliths knows that there is a raw, hidden power to them. Secrets lie beneath the desert. And I know its most terrifying one. Nadine and I were 29 at the time, desperate for a little fun before settling down and starting a family. Uncharacteristically, given our introverted natures, we put ourselves out there by making friends with a few other hotel guests. We made 5 pals over the course of the next 2 weeks. They would become 5 of the most important people in my life. Brenda, Gordon, Sigvard, Freya, and Domingo. Late one night, the 7 of us talked and drank by the pool, and we wound up playing the game of life. That classic, in which players move around the board, travelling through each of life's stages. In retrospect, I think that might have been the greatest evening of my life. Perhaps due to it being our last night on Earth. "I'll have a Heineken," Freya asked one of the waiters. Sigvard scoffed audibly, which drew a laugh from the rest of us. The recently divorced man was enjoying a holiday with his daughter before she, as he put it, ran off to university. "What? I'm 18 now, Papa," Freya pointed out with an eye roll. "Ah, to be 18 again," Domingo lamented, spinning the number wheel in the centre of the game board. The other adults at the table laughed at the 20-year-old. "What?" she said. "I'm old and wise. University has aged me. Freya will find that out for herself in September." The Swedish girl gulped. "I'm so nervous." "Ah, don't be," Domingo replied, pushing her plastic car across the game squares. "It's an amazing experience." "And why did you run away from it?" asked Freya, not in a prodding manner, but with kind-natured concern. Domingo motioned for Nadine to take her turn, and the 20-year-old uni dropout shrugged. "I just thought it would be wise to, take, as the English say, a gap year. Reading about the world made me want to see it for myself, A lovely stout American named Brenda laughed heartily at the girls' exchange. "Oh, you're both still babies. Golly, I'd love to be young. Travelling the world or heading to college. Gordon and I never got to do any of that, did we?" Her husband, a grey-haired, pot-bellied man, shook his head and pointed at the game board below us. "It'd be nice if life were this easy, eh? Get handed a job on a plate, get the kids you want, even if you ain't got the right stuff at—" "Gordon!" said Brenda, eyes welling a little as she squeezed his leg. She paused for a moment, then whispered,
We tried to have a kid, about 20 years ago. That ship sailed now, but God gave us a fine lot in life, so I ain't complaining. And Gordon ain't complaining either, when you catch him in a better temperament.
I ain't got more than one temperament, the man grouchily admitted, making his wife chuckle.
I just need to take a quick toilet break, Brenda said as she got out of her chair. I'll only be a jiffy, as you Brits like to say.
Gordon smiled and shook his head as his wife sauntered away. Lord, I love that woman. Then he leant against the table with folded arms and took a side glance at the waiting staff clearing away tables. When I looked the same way, I noted a woman in denim dungarees watching us. That in itself wouldn't have been cause for concern, but my heart dropped all the same, as I glimpsed something wrong, something that stung my head and churned my gut. She'd already slipped backwards into the shadows by the time I realised what had unsettled me so greatly. But I told myself I must have been seeing things. Still, I was certain that I'd seen eyes on her face which were far too large, misshapen, and off-coloured. A sort of luminous green, shining momentarily in the shade, before she was gone. I think about her a lot these days. I think about many things. Things that make no sense. As our group of 7 hadn't even started playing the Little Pyramid game at this point. The time was absolutely upon us. Gordon pulled my attention back to the table. I was being a grump before, but life ain't too bad. In fact, we all ought to be grateful. At least we ain't slaving away like those chumps over there. Awkward silence returned to the table, and I immediately raised a hand for the American to stop, or at the very least for him to quieten down. Gordon, don't say things like that. You'll get us in trouble. What are we playing? I was interrupted by that question, asked in a bouncy, engaging tone. Then followed the thump of a behind slumping into plastic, and head snapped in shock towards Brenda's seat, finding it occupied by a member of staff who had seemingly emerged from nowhere. The sweaty worker unbuttoned his white polo shirt, whilst the rest of us exchanged barely veiled smirks. Dominic eventually answered him. We're playing the game of life? The hotel worker nodded, then continued speaking in impeccable English. Yes, I think I've seen it before. You get a career and a family, then you die, correct? Retire, Sigvard corrected with a giggle. But otherwise, yes, it's just like real life. Ah, but real life is a disappointment, continued the slouching staff member. As is this make-believe game. If reality could provide such an easy route to happiness and riches, I certainly wouldn't be slaving away as a hotel waiter, would I? The employee parroted Gordon's insulting comment, making it abundantly clear that he had overheard our oafish friend. The rest of us sat upright, and I saw mouths open and close like ventriloquists' dummies as we searched for words. We're really sorry, sir, Dominic apologised in a mouse-like voice. Sir? The worker repeated with a laugh. Oh, please, this humble worker tends to go by Bomani. All right, pal, Gordon said. You've made your point. I'm sorry for offending you. Is that what you want to hear? Bomani raised a hand. I am not, and was not, offended, though I must admit that yes, I was eavesdropping on your conversation. I was fascinated to hear the 7 of you discuss your hopes and dreams about life. I'm not here to, what do Americans like to say, bust your chops. In fact, I thought you might be interested in learning about a similar game of life from ancient Egypt. What do you say? Gordon shrugged, clearly willing to make amends, and the rest of us nodded with uncomfortable smiles on our faces. Bomani nodded. Great. Well, firstly, you all seem to be educated people, so I'm sure you know that the pharaohs, in particular, were eager to attain the perfect life. Eager for the eternal life, which is why so many opted for mummification. However, there were those who did not share the polytheistic religious beliefs held by many in ancient Egypt. They wanted the perfect life too, but they didn't want to rely on gods to achieve it. So they became gods. Gordon huffed. Better not let my Brenda hear you talking like that, pal. She ain't too keen on blasphemy. Bomani shook his head. I'm not blaspheming. I'm simply telling you why these elites made their own private game of life. Why they developed a sacred ritual that would give them the power to shape their own lives. Let's call them the creators. Now, this game was so prestigious that the creators did not even share knowledge of it with the pharaohs. Certainly not with scholars. There are few left on Earth who even have knowledge of this game and its rules. I'm one of those few. Even its name has been lost to the sands of time. All that truly remains of it, in any tangible sense, is this. Bomani then ceremoniously plucked an object from the pocket of his trousers and held it up on his palm against the night sky. It was a white pyramid, barely an inch in width and height. That handcrafted piece of what appeared to be polished stone was so small that it sat in the pit of Bomani's palm with room to spare. Still, the man made it seem far larger, in terms of our perspectives, by positioning the minuscule thing amongst the 3 true pyramids on the horizon. And on the teensy polyhedron's sides were images, but I didn't manage to inspect them before the employee balled up the object in his hand and rolled it across the table towards Dominga. Neat, she said, picking the pyramid up. Is it a die? Bomani nodded. I suppose so. That little pyramid you hold is the game. The game of the creators. This tool offers a player absolute control over all facets of life. It offers wealth, happiness, or whatever else one desires. Sounds like a pyramid scheme, Sigvard joked. Ugh, earning a groan from his daughter. The game is simple, the hotel worker continued. You make wishes with the intent of bettering your life. With each wish, you progress to the next stage of life. I suppose, in a way, you step to the next game square on the board. However, each life is a finite cycle. After 5 wishes, you reach the end of the game. Bomani paused, then spoke pointedly, as if wanting his next words to be heard more clearly than any others. Some creators did push the limits of this little die. The end of life does not need to be the end of the game. But let's not overcomplicate things. In a basic sense, the game is played in a sacred chamber, and it involves only 4 moves. Firstly, you make a feasible wish that purely betters the life of you or other players in your group. Secondly, you roll the little pyramid, the die. Thirdly, You choose from one of its 3 visible faces. Fourthly, and finally, you walk through the triangular doorway. The triangular doorway? Dominga queried. Bomani waved her off. Let's talk about the die's 4 symbols. 1 per face. The sickle, the cross, the eye, and the sun. Each symbol will guarantee varying levels of success regarding your wish, so you must trust your instinct. Your mind, heart, and soul combined will provide the answer you need. The French student, who seemed the most fascinated out of all of us, spoke again. You mentioned that the player chooses from the Little Pyramid's 3 visible faces, but what about the 4th face? The one facing downwards, I presume? Bomani grinned, seeming immensely pleased by her question. You pick the 4th and final side if you wish to gamble, my friend. The hidden symbol promises the most rewarding results, but it is the only side which offers no guarantees. If you choose it, your wish may or may not be granted. The 4th symbol is chosen by chances. I wouldn't recommend it. Then the waiter looked up for a second, as if wanting to meet someone's eyes, but not quite having the strength to do so, before saying, or that the 4th face is chosen by a player with no other options. Personally, I prefer fun games, Gordon said gruffly. You know, ones involving more than making a wish and hoping it comes true. But hey, I'm sure this little pyramid game is a lot of fun for horoscope readers and magical thinkers, Omani. Magic is only that which we do not understand, the Egyptian retorted in a slight hiss, before abruptly shooting out of the chair. I must get back to work, but if you people are serious about this game, then I will— Oh, we're serious? Dominga interjected eagerly on everyone's behalf. It sounds cool, right guys? Gordon shrugged, but did not refuse, and the rest of us nodded with at least a modicum of intrigue. Like the American, I was hardly a magical thinker, but I thought that, if nothing else, the game would be a bonding experience for our group of friends. Very well, Bomani said as he towered over us. Meet me outside the hotel entrance at 6 o'clock tomorrow morning, and I shall take you to the sacred chamber by the Great Pyramids. I will, by then, have procured playing pyramids for each of you, including your wife, my American friend. Gordon raised a suspicious eyebrow at that. Bomani started to walk away, quickly stopped in his tracks. Then he looked over his shoulder and offered one final piece of wisdom. I must add that, once starting this game, my friends, there will be no going back to your old lives. The next morning, as Bomani taxied our group to the Great Pyramids, he seemed a little disgruntled that we were simply marvelling at the mighty monuments to one side. Seemed disgruntled that we were enjoying ourselves. And when we all clambered out of his large white van, the hotel employee reminded us of the fantastic game we were all about to play. We were sober, and was part of it. The night before, a healthy helping of liquor had made us quite amenable to his suggestion. Now we were perhaps a little less intrigued. The big pyramids to our side were far more fascinating than little ones. The little ones involved in Bomani's game. So our tour guide led us towards the Pyramid of Khufu, greatest of the 3. We shared our awe with one another in hushed whispers. That tower of dressed limestone lit by rays of sun, still bore such a distinct and recognisable shape, even after centuries of being pilfered by opportunists. And by playing Bomani's game, we were pilfering from ancient Egyptians too. That was a lesson to come. The waiter-cum taxi driver took us off the beaten path and around the edge of the Great Pyramid. He checked half a dozen times to ensure that there were no prying eyes upon us, and he produced 7 small white pyramids from his pocket and handed one to each member of the group. I started to run my thumb over the grooves of its 4 indented symbols, but Bomani snapped his fingers to draw my attention. "Keep a firm hold of your die," he instructed me. "Do so, and you will be safe." That was an odd thing to say. I just assumed him to be a theatrical man. Then Bomani knelt, plucked an 8th little pyramid from his pocket, and began to twist the white die a 1/4 inch into the sand. I opened my mouth to ask the man something which I've long forgotten, but there instead came a scream from my very core. A half moment later, I realised we were falling. 7 horrified screams, mine among them, travelled up into the sunny sky above, which pulled rapidly away from us. Our group was plummeting into a mammoth sinkhole of sand, which drove below the surface of the desert, and my screaming only loudened as I realised the hole above us was beginning to close, sealing us away from the Earth's surface. It was as Bomani had said. There would be no going back to our old lives. I knew that before I even hit the bottom. In the darkness, I flailed my hands around me, failingly searching for Nadine within the sandy waterfall carrying us near vertically downwards. Felt something. Leather fabric slipping away from me, along with the rubbery sole of a shoe. Fortunately, Nadine shrieked, assuring me that I wasn't feeling her drowning, lifeless body beneath me. She was alive. I was alive. That was all I cared about in that moment. As we cascaded down the black, I expected to die, expected the plummet to be brief and our torment to be short-lived. I know now that would have been a lesser nightmare. An underlayer of sand cushioned our falls, and the screams finally let up, descending into many stuttering sobs. "Papa," groaned Freya into the dark. Her voice sounded intimate, ricocheting off the walls of an enclosed space. "Freya!" Sigvard yelled back, before crying something else in Swedish. I took out my phone and turned on its torch, illuminating a square chamber of limestone. It was perhaps 50 by 50 meters, and bedded with a hefty blanket of sand, in which the 8 of us were lying. I shuffled over to Nadine, who was firing her gaze in all directions with teary eyes. She finally landed upon me, and her eyes softened, as did her breathing. Bomani climbed to his feet, activated a bulky handheld torch, then took deep strides towards the chamber's exit, a square archway that led onto a long tunnel, its walls decorated with shadows and a curving convoy of skittering roaches, like black bunting. "Onwards," the waiter said nonchalantly, as if we'd simply walked down a set of stairs, not tumbled an untold distance into the desert itself. It could have been 10 meters or 100. "We all made it down safely as promised, didn't we? Eh? Ain't a damn thing safe about this game of yours," Gordon roared as he lumbered forwards, but Brenda grabbed his arm. "Honey, we need him," she said. "He's the only one who knows the way out of here. Mr. Bomani, sir, you've had your fun, and now we want to go back to the surface." "You're not in any danger," Bomani said calmly.
shaking the sand off his shoes and pointing at the logo on his white polo shirt. I work for the hotel, okay? I'm not a stranger. But he very much was, I realised, a stranger. We had let our guards down, foolishly following a walking, talking, polo-shirted horror into the desert. Worse yet, nobody knew we were down there. We had no better option than to climb down the sandy slope. Nadine clung to my side, gazing at the room we were leaving behind. You okay? I asked her. She nodded at the ceiling as we neared the exit. We fell through a hole. Where is it? I looked behind me, seeing a little of my torch's glow reveal the ceiling above. Then I moved my phone around to cast the light across every inch of the ceiling. Nadine made a fair point. We had undoubtedly fallen through the ceiling, yet there was no hole, only more stone. And I'd heard no mechanism close above us. Any rational explanation escaped me. But there has to be one, I decided. Probably some hidden mechanism, I lied to my girlfriend as we followed Bomani into a long dark tunnel of limestone and granite, like the Great Pyramids above. This is just part of his game. Listen, Bomani, Gordon yelled from ahead. I pissed you off last night, and I said I was sorry about that, didn't I? You ain't gonna get away with trying to kill us down here. That isn't what I'm trying to do, the hotel worker said ominously, nodding ahead at the torchlight, revealing a room beyond the tunnel's end. This is the way out, my friends. We entered a small stone-walled chamber, with a rectangular 3 feet tall box made of lead or ancient wood. From the bronze colouring it was hard to tell. Its heavy lid sat an inch or so askew. Bomani hurriedly heaved it back into place. It was a movement so quick, nearly imperceptible, that I realised he hadn't wanted anyone to notice, and that left me with a fearful ache in my skull. At the end of the stone chamber was a triangular opening, 6 feet both high and wide, leading into blackness. Are there stairs through here? Sigvard asked, as the 8 of us gathered in the room around the bronze box, and stared at the dark doorway. The Egyptian worker smiled, ignoring the question. The game must always be played in here, the sacred chamber. We don't want to play your darn game, Gordon yelled, beetroot face dripping sweat and drawing a frightened look for Brenda. Answer Sigvard's question. Will we find stairs leading back to the surface if we go through that doorway? Bomani shook his head, smile transforming into a frown. The only way out is to play the game. Make an internal wish. Do not voice it aloud. Make an internal wish. Roll your white pyramid across this bronze box. Then choose the symbol you think will best fulfill your needs. I've had just about enough of you too, Sigvard said. Let's just do it, his daughter pleaded, attempting to calm him. He'll let us out if we play, I'm sure of it. The gathering in that chamber was a powder keg. Neither Gordon nor Sigvard seemed convinced by Freya's reasoning. I had a horrible feeling that, given too many more moments of contemplation, someone would pummel Bomani to a pulp. So I clutched my die tightly in my right palm and closed my eyes. I want to write fiction full-time, I wished internally, then corrected myself. No. I want to be the most successful writer on the planet. And then I rolled my polished miniature pyramid across the mouldy table at the heart of the room.
All voices were silenced, and every set of eyes was drawn towards the rolling die. It landed with the sickle facing downwards, which left 3 safe options on top. I certainly didn't plan on taking a gamble. The cross, the eye, or the sun. Nadine smiled at me, encouragingly nodding her head for me to make a decision. I sensed that she believed Freya's hypothesis about appeasing Bomani. We just had to play the game and get back to the surface. So, I needed to interpret the symbols. Something about the sun spoke to me. It suggested the dawn of a new day. Surely that would help my wish come true. No more toiling away at the law firm. It was time to realize my goal of becoming a successful writer. The game isn't real, Asher, I chided myself. But part of me lived in hope. I've chosen, I told Bomani, as I picked up my white pyramid and returned it to my pocket. What now? The hotel worker pointed at the triangular doorway of darkness. Now you head this way, my friend. I looked back at Nadine, not wanting to leave her alone. She nodded at me eagerly. We'd been together for 10 years, and you learn to read a person's thoughts in their eyes and lips for so much time. She looked at me as if to say that I should run and seek help, and I knew that was the best option our group had. I certainly preferred that idea to my wife going off alone. Now just wait a second, Gordon said, holding up a hand to halt me. Then he turned to Bomani. Is Asher gonna be safe, like you claim, once he walks through that doorway? Meanwhile, Freya was nervously eyeing the tunnel behind us, and the hotel employee seemed to be paying attention to her rather than the incensed American. What do you see, my friend? Bomani asked her in a low whisper. I don't know, the Swedish girl whimpered, closing her eyes and jiggling the die in her palms. But I'm not waiting to find out. Hey! Gordon interrupted angrily. Don't ignore me. I'm talking to you, Bomani. The waiter smiled in response. You ought to listen to the girl, American. Then the Egyptian hotel worker raised a finger to his lips, and after a few moments of silence, there came a slight sound. A knocking of rubble against the stony floor of the tunnel. And though it could have been anything, from skittering rodents to foundations settling, it wasn't anything. I knew what was coming, somehow. It was almost a relief, but mostly a nightmare, when more sounds joined. Reverberating footsteps from deep within the tunnel. What is that? Dominga croaked. You don't want to find out, Bomani warned lowly, setting my hairs on end as he aimed his torch firmly at the tunnel behind us. Roll your dice. Nobody needed to be told twice. As several little pyramids suddenly clattered against the bronze box, all at once. I kept my eyes on the tunnel behind, listening to quickening slaps against stone. And then shapes began to tickle the farthest reaches of Bomani's torch beam. Into his light emerged the bony remains of a figure dressed in rags and blackened strips of bacteria-ridden flesh. It was an embalmed being, little more than a skeleton, clearly had not known life for untold time. and the thing was hurtling towards us. Its eye sockets were empty, save for the rage spilling out in oozing trickles of brown. If that terror weren't enough, there was another emotion hidden within its pleading cry, which felt familiar to me, and that familiarity left me moaning in dread. A second later, the others had cast their gazes to the tunnel, and there came overlapping screams and roars of revulsion. We had all rolled our dice, so I dashed across the threshold of the triangular archway, taking the lead, with the other guests hot on my heels. My boot sole thudded roughly against a hard floor in a small room, and the screams from behind immediately vanished. When I turned, the sacred chamber was gone. In the dark was an oakwood door, the sight of which nauseated me, that worst kind of fear, triggered by an otherwise unresponsive body, violently rejecting the unnatural danger ahead. But I lunged forwards. I recognized that door. Recognized the place. I lunged forwards and found myself running a hand across the wall almost instinctively, finally meeting a light switch and flicking it on. Next came hot acid at the top of my throat as I finally processed my surroundings. I had, impossibly, returned to the front hallway of my apartment. Back in England. Mouth spluttering involuntary and terrified groans of disbelief, I staggered into the lounge. My eyes were fuzzing with brown specks of static, but I held to consciousness, no matter how desperately my body wished to collapse, wished to fall into a deep, unending slumber, so as to escape the nightmare. I peeked through living room curtains at the skyline of London beyond my window. The light pollution coloured the black sky not with its familiar white glow, but with dusty yellowy brown. There was a sand-stained blanket across existence itself. The city as a whole appeared slightly sepia-hued, appeared tangible, and so nearly recognisable, but ever so slightly off. I accepted the inevitable. I was staring at a version of Earth, but not ours. With sweaty palms, I pulled out my phone and rang Nadine. No answer, and as I eyed the device, I noted the red bubble atop the mail app, the white 1 within. I knew it was absurd to waste a moment doing anything other than trying to find Nadine, but something about the notification intoxicated me. I tapped on the app and read the latest email. Subject: Space Crew Horror Story. I read your short sci-fi story on Reddit, and I think it would make for an excellent feature film. I was talking to a friend of mine at a sizable studio, and he's willing to fund the project. If you're interested, let me know, and we'll hop on a call ASAP. The message was life-changing. After 5 years of self-publishing stories on the internet, it seemed terribly convenient and terribly forced that the opportunity of a lifetime should present itself to me, right there and right then, right after making that wish. Of course, I sharply refocused my mind on the far less explainable horror at hand. That I had stepped through a doorway connecting Egypt to this alternate version of England. I decided that it had to be a dream, even after pinching myself incessantly and feeling several sharp stings against my flesh. But the denial ended with a thud, and a wail from the entryway of my apartment.
I ran out into the well-lit front hallway to find Nadine lying against the hardwood floor. She was gazing down, in wide-eyed, abject horror, at a wriggling shape in her arms. Bundled in loose blue fabric was a newborn baby.
Nadine and I were equally horrified to see a newborn child in her lap. A little boy. My teary-eyed wife explained to me that she'd wished for the pair of us to start a family. She hadn't expected the little pyramid game to grant that wish. She hadn't believed any of it to be real. I certainly hadn't either. Nadine had rolled the die and ended up with the sun facing downwards, which left the sickle, the cross, and the eye as her options. Inspired by Bomani's interpretation of what certain symbols might bring, she chose the sickle, hoping for a successful harvest, so to speak. A baby boy was the result. Her harvest had been so successful that it seemed we had been blessed not only with immaculate conception, but with a circumvention of the entire pregnancy process. There we were, game square one, with a child of our own. We had skipped personal development and rushed straight into the family stage of the game. And 2 arduous weeks later, once I had somewhat bounced back from the trauma and regained the ability to speak, I asked Nadine, "Is it even mine?" She rolled over in bed and shot me a vicious look. Days of silence, and you ask me that? I gulped as I eyed the cot in the dark corner of our room. I'm not accusing you of anything, Nadine. Whatever happened in that chamber defied the laws of nature, so I know, my girlfriend interrupted weakly, placing an apologetic hand on my leg under the duvet. I'm sorry, I just haven't slept. And the sleepless nights hadn't a thing to do with the baby, for he slept soundly every night. No, Nadine and I were restless because we were afraid. I heard her breathing heavily in bed just like me. We didn't dare close our eyes with that thing in the corner of the room. Lloyd, we named him, but we struggled to use that name. I don't know about Nadine, but I struggled to see him as human. Words cannot describe his appearance, for there was nothing outwardly wrong with him. His eyes, nose, and lips were all in the right places. His body had all of the correct proportions. Lloyd's uncanniness stemmed from something else, and it came down to more than our psychological revulsion. The impossibility of a baby that had, much like his parents, supernaturally materialized into that apartment weeks earlier. There was a falseness to his skin. It had the appearance of human flesh, but seemed to have been generated artificially. As innocent as Lloyd seemed, I was horrified by the mere appearance of him. Horrified by his sweet smile, which harbored secrets that we would only learn once he had come of age. That haunted me too. What would he say when he could speak? Would he talk like a human? Or like something mimicking us? And there was a knowingness to his eyes. Whenever Lloyd looked upon me, I felt that he knew something I didn't. At the time, I was so terrified of our situation and the eeriness of our baby that I hardly noticed the world around us. Looking back, I see it now. See what I saw on that very first evening when I peered out at the skyline of London. The beige, sepia, seeping like the cascading sands of time into every crevice of existence. Of course, I was so exhausted at that time, I hardly registered or processed any of this. The world already seemed bleak and foreign to me. Besides, why would I have paid attention to anything other than the tiny horror in our cot? And we weren't alone. Though those initial days had been spent trying to keep ourselves and our newborn child alive, without fully unraveling psychologically or physically, Nadine and I eventually pulled ourselves together enough to try, despite our mind's resistance, to see the whole thing as a blessing. For Marnie had promised that we could wish for the lives we wanted, and he had delivered. The Little Pyramid game had delivered. When we attempted to get in contact with the rest of the group from the hotel, we managed to reach everyone but the Americans, Brenda and Gordon. After making her wish, Dominga had woken in Paris to a knock at the door of her university dorm. A stranger, who impossibly seemed to know her already, wanted to take the girl on a date. Dominga revealed that, before she rolled her die, she had wished for love. She had chosen the eye symbol, feeling it would either lead to personal insight, or a man noticing her. Her wish had been granted. Sigvard had wished for reconciliation with his wife, Freya's mother, and chosen the sun symbol, hoping for brightness after a dark period of his life, hoping, like me, for a new dawn. He had awoken in his old family home, to find his wife welcoming him with open arms. His daughter, Freya, had wished for the strength to face what was to come, and she had chosen the cross symbol. She explained her reasoning. This ordeal was, in a sense, a cross to bear. She had then woken in her family home back in Sweden, along with her father. It was difficult to tell, through the medium of messaging, whether the girl had been granted her wish, whether she felt like that famous lion from Oz, any more courageous than before. The lack of response from Brenda or Gordon made me fear that they, perhaps, had risked the downwards-facing sides of their dice. Gordon, in particular, struck me as a chancer, a gambler. I contemplated the terrible possibility that the couple had faced some horrid consequence of choosing the option with no guarantees, the fourth side of the die. Still, I decided that might have still been preferable to the alternative. That perhaps they hadn't managed to make it through the triangular doorway in time. Hadn't escaped before that creature caught up to them. The other members of the group corresponded regularly, daily for the most part. After a few months had passed, most of us were seeing therapists to help overcome the trauma of what we'd experienced in Egypt. We all told abridged versions of events, naturally, as none of us fancied being sectioned for our grand and impossible tales. Claims of the paranormal that would, to a psychiatrist, seem utterly detached from reality. The healing power of time and therapy seemed to vary in success from person to person. Sigvard acted happier. Freya appeared happy to have her parents back together. Dominga appeared to bounce back to her old bubbly self, but part of me suspected that might well be a facade, a coping mechanism for the awfulness she had experienced. Regardless, we grew accustomed to the impossibility of it all, as humans are far more adaptable than you might believe. As a group, we came to view our toy pyramids as gifts that had only made our lives better. Yet there persisted doubt in each of our minds, doubt that our lives had truly improved. Every message of positivity was capped with words of unease. I am so happy to be back with my darling Anita, but she feels different, said Sigvard. I love Manon, but I get goosebumps when I think of how we met. He knew me before I knew him. That will never sit right. I know I should be grateful for all that the pyramids have given us, but I'm not, said Dominga. That was the overarching theme, the unnaturalness of our gifts, Everything we had gained felt unsubstantial, as there was an artificiality to it all. The materialization of Dominga's new boyfriend, Manon. The sudden personality shift of Agneta, Sigvard's wife. And in my case, the whirlwind of success in terms of my film deal. I hadn't wanted to contact the producer who emailed me, but Nadine insisted that we needed the money for the baby, that I needed to put aside my existential dread about this wish-granting game. I needed to swallow my fear and accept the gift. I was paid a nauseating amount of money for the rights to my story, enough that I quit my job as a sales associate. My financial success sparked conversations in our group that perhaps next time we should all wish for billions in wealth. Dominga pointed something out, however. Bomani warned that we should only wish for feasible improvements in our lives. I think we ought to be careful. We're not seriously considering using the dice again, are we? Freya asked. The Swedish girl's question had an obvious answer as far as Nadine and I were concerned. No. So we managed to convince everyone to simply accept what the game had given us, but never talk about it again. Besides, the dice would only function in that sacred chamber below Khufu's pyramid, according to Bomani, and I didn't believe that any of us had the intention of ever returning to Egypt. Months quickly turned to years. I don't know whether the rapid passing of time had something to do with paranormal force quickening my experience of reality, or in a more natural sense, the fact that I'd hit my 30s. And as Lloyd became a child, freely speaking his mind, those early thoughts of unease returned. It didn't take long for them to strengthen and worsen either. You see, what made Lloyd so uncanny to me wasn't that he spoke as some sort of alien or inhuman thing, but precisely that he didn't. He was normal. He was a human being with a heart and a soul, completely ignorant to the circumstance of his conception. And that was what made him so deeply wrong. It had nothing to do with my discomfort regarding the impossibility of Lloyd's existence. Well, perhaps it had something to do with that, but there was an aspect of our baby boy, perhaps unseen, that felt unimaginably dangerous. Perhaps it bore some relation to that knowing look I'd first noted in the boy's eyes when he was a baby, a look that remained as he grew older. All of that being said, there would come from time to time odd utterances from his lips. You and Mum should spend more time together, Lloyd once told me as a toddler. Life isn't that long. There was something plastic about him, which is a dreadful thing to say about one's own child, but it's true. I know this because Nadine shared my fears, whispered them to me late at night when we were sure our child wouldn't overhear us. We were terrified of him, in some way we couldn't quite place, until one particularly horrible night. Dad? Came a whisper from the ajar bedroom doorway. My eyes shot open and my skin clenched. I didn't want to roll over to face Lloyd, but he was my son, no matter how I felt. So I rolled over, and I saw him standing there. 5 years old and 3 feet tall, with cherub features half revealed by moonlight shining through my bedroom window. What is it, Lloyd? I asked. You should be asleep. I waited for the boy to blink, but he didn't. It was the first tangibly unnatural thing he'd ever done, other than, perhaps, as I mentioned before, the odd things he would say. But then I've heard of other parents experiencing such things. This was the first night really got under my skin. Lloyd moaned something with genuine dread.
She said they're coming for you and Mum.
And then a shape moved behind him. I realised it had been there the entire time, but my foggy, sleepy eyes had been adjusting to the dark. It was the outline of that black, undead stalker we had seen in the chamber 5 years earlier. I screamed, and Lloyd jumped, prompting his shoulders to be gripped firmly by the undead stalker standing behind him. Nadine shot upright, woken from her sleep, and our son pulled the bedroom door shut.
What?
My girlfriend moaned. I jumped out of bed and ran towards the door, then flung it open, catching the tail end of our boy scurrying back into his room.
Asher,
Nadine hissed.
what is it?
I panted heavily, eyeing the shaded upstairs landing beyond our room. A space too shaded for its secrets to be fully revealed. Then there sounded a slight, near imperceptible creak from the far end of the hallway, and my chest seized in terror. I immediately slammed the light switch beside our door, illuminating the corridor. The figure was gone. I stormed across the landing to Lloyd's room and pushed his door open. The boy was lying in his bed, shivering under the cover. He was alone. There was no one else in the room. But there certainly had been, and I told Nadine as much when she rushed over to our son's open door. There was something in our house.
Something?
She asked. I nodded. Then came the pings of messages on our phones. Our friends from Egypt had seen the same.
It replaced Manon's face, said Dominga. I saw that awful black skull lying next to me in bed. I think we need to find Bomani. We've all known for years that something wasn't right, but we buried our heads in the sand, hoping it would all go away. The game never ended, did it? We're all still playing it, said Freya. I've booked a room at that same hotel in Giza, and I'll be there on June 19th. I think we should all meet there in person, agreed? Asked Dominga.
Nadine and I argued relentlessly about it. She didn't want to return, didn't want to relive the hell of that game. We had agreed that we would never look back, that we would do our best with Lloyd and pray for him to grow up into a boy who didn't strike fear into our hearts. But that hadn't been the reality. The reality was that, as Freya had said, the game never ended. We had slipped into another world, whether we wanted to believe that or not. All was slightly off, be it the colour of our surroundings or the people we had wished into existence. Omani had warned us that the game would be this way, but we had dismissed him. There will be no going back to your old life. That was what he had said. When we stepped through that doorway, I told Nadine, I think we stepped into another version of our reality. Like stepping onto the first square of a board game, I suppose. And we have to find out whether Bomani can send... Okay, we have to go back and find out whether Bomani can send us back to the world we knew before. The one before this game. My girlfriend looked towards our son's bedroom door, which I'd just closed, then whispered,
And what happens to him if we go back?
I winced, trying to contain my frustration. I didn't care about him, and I hate myself for the fact that I didn't, but I just wanted to save us. So I said,
don't know, okay? But things are only going to get worse if we continue like this, Nadine. You know that. Lloyd terrifies me. But I love him. He's our child. I don't want to lose him, he said. We don't know that we will lose him, I unconvincingly replied. Look, we'll ask my parents to look after him during our trip to Egypt, okay? We just need to do this, Nadine. You know we do. This isn't right. We need to find a way of bargaining with Bomani so that everything can go back to normal. Not everything, she reiterated. I sighed, looking at our son's door. Right. Not everything. On a late summer's evening in Giza, Nadine and I stood in the lit driveway at the foot of that old hotel, holding each other's hands so tightly that our skin had turned white. We didn't talk, just looked out into the night, eyeing those well-lit pyramids against the distant horizon. Though, of course, such mighty structures never truly looked distant. Even in England, so many miles away, that desert with its nightmarish game chamber beneath had never felt more than a stone's throw away. For 5 years, I had known that the game wasn't over, but it all felt far realer at the heart of the horror. There was more clarity to that false reality than ever as I eyed the night sky, being painted with a dark golden hue and brushstrokes from above. It was as if we were trapped in a sand-filled hourglass, watching those colours trickle down towards us. The wind filled the silence, stealing across our frozen flesh, but I still tried to think of something comforting to say to my girlfriend. I think I may have been close until... "Dom!" cried Nadine, letting go of my hand. I turned to watch the two women run towards one another, and they met in a warm embrace. The French traveller looked weathered by the past 5 years, and I'm sure Nadine and I looked much the same. There were large bags under the girl's eyes, marring her smooth complexion. I suppose she wasn't really a girl anymore. And as Dominga talked about her life with Manon, a man she loved and feared in equal measure, her aged look made sense. Much like little Lloyd back in England, her Parisian boyfriend was the result of wish fulfillment. Manon may have been flesh and blood and soul, but he was a dream, and that had clearly taken its toll on her. There was something impermissible and abhorrent about what we had done. The three of us had been talking for a good half hour when 2 more weary souls joined our group. Sigvard, now sporting quite a few grey hairs amongst the blonde, and Freya, who had aged a little more fairly than the rest of us. I wondered whether her wish for strength may have helped. "Where's Agneta?" I immediately asked, and Nadine shot me a look as if to say that I ought not to have asked such a thing. Sigvard grimaced, then put an arm weakly around Freya's shoulders. "No, it's just the 2 of us." "Mama isn't right," his daughter said. "Freya!" quietly scolded Sigvard. "What? It's true," she said. "That isn't Mama, and I want her back. The real Mama, okay? Let's not do this right now," pleaded her father. I hung my head ashamedly. "I'm sorry, that was insensitive of me. I shouldn't have asked." Sigvard said nothing in response. He looked out at the pyramids, refusing to release his grip on his adult daughter.
It was clear he still saw her as the girl she had been all those years ago. But by no great stretch of the imagination, the hardship of the past half-decade had still aged each of us beyond our years. Yes, Freya looked a little less haggard than the rest of us, but she was different. There was wisdom in her eyes, beyond her 24 years of age. I sighed. I spoke to the hotel staff. Bomani hasn't worked here for 3 years. Sigvard growled. How will we find him, do you think?
Am I the only one of us who's spent the last 5 years doing any sort of research?
Domingo asked.
I did some digging on Bomani and learned things about his lineage online. His ancestors from eons ago were players of the Little Pyramid game. There is evidence of their great successes in life tracing back centuries. Rumours quickly spread about the rituals they performed to be so fortuitous and to amass such wealth. Their game of life, so to speak, was no secret around these parts. How do you know all of this? Nadine asked.
The French girl smiled and folded her arms.
History's my area of expertise. I know where to look when it comes to this sort of thing. But let me tell you that the information isn't readily available.
Did you learn anything new about the game? I asked. Anything that might help us get out of it without Bomani's help?
Domingo frowned and shook her head.
No, but I learnt about the game's history.
There have been many non-elites who infiltrated the sacred chamber, armed with toy pyramids and ready to better their lives. However, as punishment for stepping above their stations, they were treated to a twisted, impure version of the game. Though it granted their wishes, it also tricked them into a different reality. Unbeknownst to them, those poor souls had vanished from the face of the true Earth. Vanished somewhere else.
I came a pause as the 5 of us eyed each other with frightened expressions, then cast our eyes to our sepia-hued environment, to surroundings which I had sensed for 5 years were not quite right. And Freya asked the question we were all considering.
Where are we, Dom?
Somewhere else, the French historian replied. Nadine shuddered, huddling into me for warmth, for comfort and safety from the harshness and inexplicableness of the faux foreign world around us. I tried to give that to her by standing with a steadiness, flat and immovable against this horrifying place, which swallowed us from all sides. We have to find Bomani, I said. Yeah, we do. He did this to us, Sigvard snarled in a low whisper. All because, what? The American insulted him? Insulted his family by looking down upon the waiting staff at the hotel. I don't know which one of those bastards I hate more.
Papa, said Freya softly. Come on, it's nobody's fault.
Sigvard pulled away from his daughter and began to pace to and fro. He was enraged and poised to say or do something foolish. I read that much in his eyes. But just as he opened his mouth to speak, Sigvard's eyes caught something in the darkness, walking towards the light of the driveway, in front of the hotel entrance. Sigvard gasped. Brenda? Our heads all swiveled to the left, following the Swedish man's gaze towards a little grey-haired lady, strolling into the light. A lady I hadn't expected we would ever see again. Nadine gasped.
We thought something had happened to you. Well, didn't something happen to all of us?
Brenda asked timidly, shivering at the edge of the hotel light's reach. Freya held her arms outwards, offering an embrace to the American woman, but Brenda shook her head. And then came a series of footsteps as a man entered the light beside her. Not Gordon, her husband, but a young fellow in his early 20s. "Who is that?" Sigvard asked. Brenda smiled, eyes tearing as the young man twisted his head towards her lovingly. She refused to meet his gaze, which felt disquieting to me. "Hello?" Sigvard pressed. "Did you hear me, Brenda? Why have you been ignoring us for 5 years, only to show up unannounced?" "Hugo! He is Hugo," the American woman hysterically said. "And he's my son." The group was stunned into silence. Each of us simultaneously and rapidly did the mental arithmetic necessary to deduce that the sum wasn't adding up. Brenda didn't have a son when we met her in 2010, and she'd already been well past the age of fertility then. But even if she had, by some miracle, managed to conceive a child in the past 5 years, well, he would have been 5 years old at most, much like our Lloyd back home. He wouldn't and couldn't have been a man of a similar age to Freya and Dominga. It was an impossibility far greater than anything the rest of us had faced, and we had faced spontaneously materializing people of our own. It suddenly made absolute sense to me that Brenda and Gordon had been silent for so many years, that they hadn't replied to our messages. However, the whereabouts of her husband certainly played on my mind. Of course, it seemed like the sort of question that Nadine would chastise me for asking, so I kept my lips sealed and imagined what might have happened to him. Sigvard, on the other hand. "Where is he?" the Swedish father bluntly inquired. "Where is Gordon? I want a word without fool. If he hadn't poked and prodded Bomani, then maybe we would have avoided all of this." "He left," Brenda choked out, eyes swelling as her son Hugo gently clutched her shoulders. The elderly mother recoiled from his touch, in the same way that Nadine and I always involuntarily recoiled from our own child. A reflexive reaction to a person that we knew shouldn't exist. "I'm so sorry," Freya began. "But at least you have your son." Then it was Hugo's turn to speak. Plastic man. "Dad left on the night he and Mum came back home. He took one look at me and, well, he didn't remember me. Neither did Mum, but she loved me at least, and that was enough. Is enough." The man squeezed his mother tightly, and I could see she was desperately trying to avoid letting a cry of dread spill free, trying desperately not to scream for her son to get away from her. I knew that because Brenda wore the look I had worn so many times around Lloyd, perhaps every time. There followed an uncomfortable silence after Hugo spoke, and he eyed each of us knowingly, eyed us in the same way my son often eyed us. And not to act as if the world were revolving around me, but I felt a twinge of fear, because Brenda's boy seemed to let his gaze linger on me for longer than he let it linger on the others. "Why?" I wondered. "Why are you staring as if you know me?" "I'm not oblivious, you know," Hugo admitted, letting his arm drop from his mother's shoulders. He looked close to tears too. "I know you all feel awkward. I know Mum feels awkward, okay? The situation is strange. We've discussed it at length many times." "Hugo, please," said Brenda.
No, Mum, I don't blame you for not remembering, he said, still eyeing me. But then he finally twisted his head towards her. Your wish wasn't to remember, was it? You wished for a family, and that was what you got. Another uncomfortable silence. This time it came with a deeper sting of dread. I didn't feel right around Hugo in the slightest, and I feared that my own son would grow up to be just like him. No longer an uncanny tot, but an uncanny man, capable of standing toe-to-toe with me, capable of finally tearing me limb from limb. Stop thinking that way, I told myself. It isn't Lloyd or Hugo that you fear. It isn't even Bomani. You fear that darkness in the chamber below the Great Pyramids. Look, I'm gonna wait in the hotel, Hugo said, backing towards the entrance with arms upwards. It'll be better this way. It'll put you all more at ease, I guess. It's fine. I see the way you're looking at me. Yeah. We all watched silently as Brenda's son, who shouldn't exist, strolled towards the hotel entrance. I'll see you later, his mother eventually croaked, as he entered the automatic doors. Hugo nodded, then shouted back, "Make sure you start where you left off, Mum." And then, as soon as the glass panes had closed behind him, his mother keeled forwards and released a heavy, nauseated exhale, one that she'd clearly been holding in her chest throughout the conversation, one that she'd been holding perhaps for the past 5 years. "I need things to go back to the way they were before," she said. "I need Gordon back. I need my old life. Away from the sand." She looked tearfully up at the sky, which had been unrelentingly threatening to rain an entire desert upon our heads for a half-decade. "Bomani will end this nightmare," said Sigvard confidently. "We need to find him. We need to—" "What did Hugo say?" Nadine suddenly interjected, eyes narrowing as she looked at Brenda. "Start where you left off, Mum. He was telling us to go back to the pyramid, wasn't he? Back to the chamber below the desert." The old American woman offered only a shrug of her shoulders, but Dominga nodded. "Yeah, I think it's the best lead we've got, right?" "What?" Sigvard asked. "Have you all lost your minds? In case you've forgotten, that place nearly killed us." "Hugo knew something," Nadine insisted. "Yes, he did," Sigvard conceded. "Because there's something wrong with him." Brenda huffed. "And what about your Agneta? Is she fine?" "No," Sigvard cried. "She's just as wrong as the rest of this." "Papa," said Freya, walking over to her father with a hand outstretched. "I've ordered a taxi," Dominga announced, waving her phone to distract the rest of us. 2 minutes, and it'll be here." Sigvard didn't protest. He sniffled as Freya comforted him. "We have to do it, Papa. We have to go back there. We have to try to get out of this." He nodded. I know, I'm sorry, Freya. I messed up everything. I took Mama away from you. Your real Mama, I mean. Now we've been left with this thing that looks like her, but isn't her. We all made this mistake together, I said, and we'll all fix it together. Come on.
The taxi driver, half dozing off at the wheel of his 8-seat van, dropped us off on the road adjacent to the Great Pyramid of Giza around midnight. And as our group skirted around the edge of the ancient structure, guided by the artificial light surrounding its base, I felt gripped by the very air swirling around me, as if the desert specks of sand were chewing my flesh, striving to hold me in place so I wouldn't be able to reach that forbidden underground chamber again. But we pushed onwards, gluing our bodies to the outer edge of the hefty limestone blocks which formed the Great Pyramid's bottom layer. We pushed and pushed until we reached that place from 5 years earlier. That spot in which Bomani had keyed the sand with his tiny white pyramid. That place in which some spectral door had been unlocked, causing the world to cascade away from us and plummet our ragdoll bodies into the underworld. Once we go down there, we'll be trapped, Sigvard said as we stood in a circle. We need to really think about this, okay? As Bomani said, there's only ever one way out. The game. The game that we all agreed we were never going to play again.
After 5 years of research, I've learnt next to nothing, Dominga said. And I don't know about you, but I don't know how much longer we're going to be able to live in this deformed reality. We have to face this if we want to end it, Sigvard.
I knelt down in the glow of one of the pyramid's nearby spotlights. Then I dipped a hand into my pocket and felt my stomach lurch as my fingers gloved around the teensy ridged pyramid resting there. I scooped it out and placed one of its faces against the sand. Keep a firm hold of your dice, I warned everyone. Struggling to stick my fingers tightly to the upper 3 faces of the pyramid die, I twisted it a ½ inch into the sand, much as I'd seen Bomani do all of those years ago. And I heard not a single exhale, not a single word, as the 6 of us waited with breath held for the desert to collapse. Then Sigvard sighed, a sigh of relief, I think. It didn't work. So maybe we should just give up on this. The weary Swedish father was interrupted by the sand lifting away from our feet. Lifting. And as it did, I felt the pull of gravity invert. Only then did the horrifying truth dawn upon me. Dawn upon all of us, I assume, because there came a series of shrieks and screams. We were falling once more, but not into the sand. We were falling away from it. We were falling upwards. I flailed my limbs wildly as I realized that the world had been upturned. The city of Giza was above us, whilst nothing but the starry sky waited below. The surface of Earth rushed away as our screeching forms descended into the atmosphere. And each of us were clutching, clawing, and spinning out of control. My eyesight blurred as I spun at an unthinkable speed, unable to discern Nadine, and I felt my consciousness slip away as I tried and failed to call out for her. The most nightmarish part of it all was I felt hopeful in some tired compartment of my mind that the horror was about to come to an end. Death felt like a mercy. But we were met not by the cold embrace of outer space, freezing our bodily fluids and suffocating us agonizingly slowly. We were met not even by a wall of glass, which I had previously imagined might surround the hourglass world in which we lived, a sand timer which had been overturned, spilling grains from the sky. Rather than those ends I had imagined, my body was cushioned by a cool, dense, and immaterial wall. Not a solid liquid or gas, but an unseen floor, buried within the very dark of the sky. And there I lay, on that invisible ground, no longer deafened by the rush of air tearing past my ears. I was better able to hear the moans and cries of the others. I immediately pushed up to my feet, wobbled for a second as I realized that I was standing on nothing but blackness within the fabric of the sky itself. Then I eyed the other 5 game players, lying atop a transparent layer of reality alongside me. Asher, moaned Nadine as I helped her to her feet. My girlfriend took a look at the stars and the clouds swimming beneath us, and her legs buckled momentarily. Her disposition worsened when she looked up at the lit streets of Giza lining the desert ceiling a half-mile above our heads. Best not to look down, I advised, before cranking my head backwards to eye the upside-down pyramids overhead, looming like yellowing upper teeth in the gum of the desert. Best not to look up either. What is this? Sigvard cried as Freyr helped him to his feet. What have you done, Asher? I frowned, tiring of the father's stream of accusations. Do you think I know any more than you? Do you think I asked for this? Stop it, Freyr said. Then she pointed at the desert above us. Look. Sigvard and I benched our testosterone and cast our eyes upwards, like the others, to see something unnerving, illuminated by the spotlight surrounding the Great Pyramid. A black chasm was opening to the side of the ancient structure, in the spot of sand from which we had just fallen. The spot which should have carried us down into the hidden chamber beneath the desert, not up to the sky above, no, below. Yes, it hurts my head too. The moon and the artificial light from the city illuminated something else. Climbing, or falling, plumes of sand. They were coming towards us. Ascending, descending towards us, I don't know. It all depends on one's perspective of that topsy-turvy world. From the outer edge of that circular hole in the desert floor, walls of sand were approaching. A growing desert-built tunnel was shooting towards us at great speed. And strolling along the inner wall of the tunnel was a man. The tides of sand were carrying him at an immense speed, up or down, towards us. It didn't take long to identify him, thanks to the moonlight shining up from below our feet. You, Sigvard whispered. It was Bomani. The Egyptian game master stood at a perpendicular angle to us, feet clinging to the tunnel like a certain comic book wall crawler. He was abiding by yet another set of gravitational laws that defied reason, causing my head to implode, causing my gut to implode, as I was overcome by the terror that at any moment the laws of gravity might return to normal, which would have sent our group tumbling a half-mile down to the sand below, to meet our inevitable and painful ends. Bomani came to a halt and stood horizontally only a meter or two above our heads. He seemed neither happy nor sad. He seemed disappointed. I thought you would come back for your second turn at the game far sooner than this. Foolish. It's reckless.
You all dawdled for so long that they noticed you." "Who noticed us?" Nadine asked hoarsely.
Bomani sighed.
"The ancients. I told you that this was their game. And Dominga was right. It was not built for lowly folk such as you."
"Have you been watching us?" I asked.
Bomani shrugged. "I've been watching the game, that is all." "What does that mean?" Randa asked with a sniffle. "Mr. Bomani, sir, I'm sorry that my husband was rude to you, but it isn't fair for you to treat us like this. We all just want to go home. We told you."
"And I helped you all get home, didn't I?" Bomani answered. "Not only that, but you returned home to find that your wishes had all come true, did you not?" "This isn't the real world!" Sigvard yelled, eyes tearing up.
"No," Bomani admitted. "Only the ancients are gifted their wishes in the real world. For peasants who infiltrate this sacred game, wishes are granted only in this idea of a world." "So our friends and family back in reality think we're dead?" Freya asked.
Bomani nodded.
"Yes, but you have your mama here, Freya. Mama and Papa back together. Is that not what you wanted?"
"I'm going to bury you here," Sigvard promised in a low, husky voice.
"Anger does not become you, my friend," Bomani said, shaking his head. "You remind me of the American, our absent party member." Sigvard narrowed his eyes, but managed to stop himself short of yelling again. "I'm not like that bastard." Freya looked at her father disparagingly, willing him to control himself. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean that, Brenda," apologized Sigvard, before he turned to Bomani. "Sir, just let my daughter out of here, okay? I'll do anything."
"You must hurry," Bomani warned, motioning with a hand for us to follow him into the tunnel, which stood perpendicular to our invisible floor. Its sandy edges were touching the sky-composed ground. "Quickly, before they find you. As I said, you have been dawdling, giving them time to catch up. It's time. We must go. Now." Sigvard nodded, placing a hand on the tunnel's inner wall. "I'll go first."
"Papa,"
began Freya, but her father had already planted his feet against the sandy surface, and he grunted painfully as his body shifted its gravitational rule set to that of the upwards tunnel. The Swedish man was standing horizontally to our group of players, looking Bomani dead in the eyes. And it was then I sensed what was about to happen.
"Don't!"
I tried to warn him, but it was too late to talk the man down. Sigvard charged towards the former hotel employee, snatched him by the lapels of his leather jacket, then roared as he lifted the man off the ground and flung him forwards. I hoped that Bomani would land on the wall of the tunnel, relatively unharmed, but Sigvard had clearly hoped for something else, a wish he was granted, without needing the power of a pyramid die. As soon as Bomani's feet lifted off the tunnel, the laws of gravity shifted for him, and he fell upwards, screaming. Fell up, through the tunnel, towards the hole in the desert above. His arms and legs kicked wildly as he dropped or climbed towards a dark fate. As his daughter cried,
horrified by what her father had done. Dominga whispered, "You're insane." "We needed him," I told the father furiously. Sigvard shook his head, twisting to look forwards at the people standing horizontally, to his perspective, on the sky floor. The people cranking their heads to look up at him. "We don't need him. We need only each other, and we will get out of this. Come on. Let's go." And the man's eyes enlarged as he trailed off, looking at something below our feet, and the rest of us looked downwards to gaze at the moon and the clouds and the stars beneath. Something was falling from the sky, rising up towards the non-existent floor beneath us. Those grains of brown, like sand. And we, a set of bats, hanging from our invisible perch in the sky, stood helplessly. "Ah!" Brenda winced, clutching her forearm. She bore a bloody scratch from the sandy rain. It wasn't sand at all. I felt the hot sting of something piercing my skin too, and I cried out as one of those brown flecks flew up my calf from the sky below to carve a bloody paper cut of quite some depth. None of us needed to be told by Sigvard again. We all stepped onto the tunnel's sandy inner walls, and I felt my head turn feathery. Felt my innards shift as my feet clung to the upwards tunnel, and then I joined the Swede's gravitational angle. From my perspective, the tunnel now ran forwards, not upwards. It ran towards the desert ahead, towards that hole which waited for us in the distance. As I helped Nadine to our feet, putting the sky to our left-hand side rather than below us, the raining grains of sand shot sideways down the tunnel. Horizontal pellets that chipped away at our flesh. The six of us ran, dashed that half-mile in excruciating pain, as sandy specks, more painful than the largest droplets of hail, pounded relentlessly against our fleeing bodies. The desert hole neared quickly, and the blackness became all I saw. When the opening finally swallowed us, the brown sideways rain stopped, and the tunnel's sand-composed walls began to collapse back to the desert below. Then came a final stomach-lurching shift of gravity, returning us to normality, and the black drop into the chamber of the ancient game was below. The tumble was hellish, but somehow less sickening than everything else we had experienced that day. Terror quickly becomes relative, and as we lay in the sandy pit below, each of us scrambled to turn on our phone lights. When they burst to life, Nadine let out a sound of nauseating horror. Lying in the sand, in the center of our torch-wielding group, was Bomani's bloody, mangled, lifeless corpse. I looked towards Sigvard. His eyes were wide and unblinking. He did this to us, the father said, but it was clear to me that he was haunted by what he had done. How will we get home without him? Dominga asked. Freya wailed inconsolably and shrugged her father off as he tried to comfort her. Then she got up and began to walk towards the stone tunnel, the one which led to the chamber. Silently and begrudgingly, unsteadily, we clambered to our feet and followed. Though there seemed something utterly wrong to my mind with continuing to play the game. I agreed with Sigvard in a way. We were only stumbling deeper into the belly of the beast. Each die roll would push us a square farther along the game board, and that was a square farther away from the starting point, from the true version of Earth. I knew all of this even back then,
when we were only on the first square of the playing board. But I said nothing. I wanted to be proven wrong so badly. When we made it back to the sacred chamber, I noticed that the stone box's lid was sitting askew once more, but nobody else seemed to care. Freya was already rolling her die. "Sweetheart," her father began to plead. She had already silently chosen her symbol. Freya picked up the die, ignoring her father, and walked through the dark, triangular doorway ahead. "I suppose we ought to follow," Dominga said, jiggling her own die in her hands. "Shouldn't we take a moment to think about this?" Nadina asked as the French girl rolled. "We said we were going to try to get out of the game, not keep playing it." Dominga sighed, eyeing the symbols on her rolled die and silently making a decision. "If we have any hope of getting out of this without Bomani's help, it'll be back at the surface, okay? And the only way to get to the surface is to keep playing, so there's no way back, Nadine. We have to do this." The Frenchwoman scooped up her die and followed Freya through the doorway, leaving 4 of us in the chamber. Nadine looked at me helplessly, and I shrugged my shoulders, which drew a nod from her. A begrudging nod. Without words, we had just communicated that we were going to do this. We had no better option than to play. Dominga was right. We needed to get back to the surface. Above all else, that chamber wasn't safe. "You next, Brenda," I said, guiding the lost, teary-eyed woman towards the slightly off-center tabletop.
"Will Hugo be up there, waiting for me? Waiting for me in this new world we're about to enter?"
I nodded, but the truth was that I hadn't the foggiest clue. And there was something haunting about the look in that woman's eyes. I'd seen the relief on her face when Hugo walked back into the hotel. Brenda was finally free from her unsettling son. But I'd also seen the sadness she clearly felt at being parted from her baby. The duality of fear and love was something I understood all too well, as that lethal concoction of emotions came from my own connection with Lloyd, the little boy waiting for Nadine and me back home. Brenda rolled the die, made her decision, then put the tiny toy back into her pocket. Nadine helped her walk on trembling legs towards the doorway, and then the woman vanished. Sigvard was slouching against the wall, hands burrowing deeply into his hair, and eyes staring vacantly at the brickwork opposite. So I turned to Nadine and nodded for her to go next. "I'll talk to him," I said, and she nodded. Once my girlfriend had rolled her die, made her decision, and walked through the doorway, only the Swedish father and I remained. "Sigvard, My words were interrupted by the sounds of the ancient limestone in the tunnel quaking. Stone grinding against stone. Then there came the sound of footsteps. Many, many footsteps. Urgent footsteps, overlapping one another in their bid to reach us. In the light of my torch, vaguely illuminating the tunnel behind us, a surge of a dozen bodies came into view. Bodies squeezing against one another to barrel through the hallway. Contorted skeletal limbs of undead things far more horrifying than the pursuing horror that had been stalking my family in England. "Come on!" I yelled, beginning to shake my die in my hand as I wished for love and peace with Nadine. "Sigvard, we need to move!" I rolled my die, chose the cross, hoping that Nadine and I would be able to bear what was to come, and looked over at Sigvard, but I was horrified to see that he, aware as he may have been of the approaching threat and the words I had spoken, was not holding his own die, was not showing any intent of rolling it. And the man stood up, walked over to the entrance to the stone tunnel, and told me, "Go." I watched the filthy, horrifying bodies come gushing down the passageway like sewage, and I found myself feeling a deep shame as my feet carried me backwards towards the triangular doorway, rather than forwards towards Sigvard. The guard forming a defensive barrier between me and those things. But as the darkness of the exit started to take me, moments before I saw that undead tidal wave of creatures reach the Swedish man, I realized that I only did what I had to do. For Nadine. Maybe even for Lloyd. Maybe. When I walked through that black doorway, the air felt hot and heavy, and then all of a sudden I felt no air at all, but a rush of sand encasing my entire body from head to toe. I screamed, reaching my hands upwards and desperately clawing to the surface. Multiple hands seized my forearm and upper arm, then began to tug upwards. I emerged, and I was shocked to find myself not back in my English apartment, but at the foot of the Great Pyramid of Giza. I entered the harsh, blinding light of day, having been plucked from the desert floor by Nadine, Dominga, and Freya, whilst Brenda sat on a slab of stone at the base of the pyramid, shivering uncontrollably. I coughed up a mouthful of sand, with the help of Nadine patting my back. The first oddity to hit me was not that it was daytime, but that the world felt darker than before, as if the fabric of the sky had been pigmented with a blend of that sandy sepia from the old world and an Egyptian blue of this new one. We were one step farther away from reality, one step deeper into this maddening game of falseness. Game Square 2.
Where is he, Asher?
Freya asked calmly, wrenching me from my thoughts. She was scanning the sand frantically.
Where's Papa?
I gulped as Nadine helped me to my feet. Freya,
Well, come on, help me look for him.
she continued as she knelt and started to dig with her hands.
Come on, he's suffocating. We need to get him out of the sand.
I joined her on my knees and placed a hand on her shoulder, which the girl shrugged off anxiously. The Swedish daughter clearly sensed what I was about to say. He's not down there, Freya. I'm sorry. She ignored me and continued digging, so I looked to Nadine and Dominga for help. The two women offered empathetic stares but looked just as lost and helpless as me. Freya, I continued bleakly. Sigvard didn't roll the die. He saved me. She stopped digging, but did not pull her eyes away from the sand as she spoke to me.
Saved you from what? Saved you from what, Asher? What happened to him down there?
I stopped, patching myself before telling her. He's just gone, Freya. I expected tears or screaming or some combination of the two. Expected the woman to stand and thump me, blaming me for her father's death. But none of that happened. Freya sniffled, wiped an arm roughly against her eye, then took a deep breath.
Dominga, she said firmly. What do we do now?
The rest of us were visibly stunned by Freya's emotional stability in the face of such horrific news, but I immediately thought of her initial wish. Strength. She had wisely wished to be more courageous in the face of this game's adversity, and that was beginning to seem far more valuable than the hundreds of thousands of pounds in my bank account. Then again, there was something utterly unnerving about it. About a woman losing her father and letting only a slight sniffle loose before moving along to more important matters. It was as cold and unearthly and out of place as everything else that had come about as a wish of the game. And I started to fear that, once we had made enough wishes, we would all become lifeless and unreal shells, like Hugo, Lloyd, and Agneta. "Dominga," repeated Freya. "What's the plan?" The Frenchwoman shook her head. Freya, are you okay? We don't have to do this. I don't want to talk about it right now, Freya interjected. I just want to know what you think we should do. You said we'd be able to fight this horror once we return to the surface. Well, here we are. And you need to tell us what to do. Dominga scratched her brow nervously. Well, we need to find out more about Bomani's heritage, I suppose. Find out about the elites who played this game centuries ago. Perhaps if we discover what ritual they performed to create this practice, we'll be able to undo it. Destroy the game from the inside. That's a lot of maybes and what-ifs, Brenda said. Do we really want to fight this? Nadine frowned. Why on earth would you even ask that, Brenda? The American lifted her weak eyes. Well, is it really so bad? Stop, Freya said, or I'm going to get angry. My girlfriend nodded in agreement. This game isn't a good thing, Brenda, she said. But you and I have babies now, Nadine, continued Brenda. We have to think of them. Jesus, Dominga muttered under her breath, rolling her eyes in despair. None of this is real, Brenda. Hugo's real, Brenda insisted with a whimper. Lloyd's real. Agneta's real. Maybe in some twisted kind of way, I said. But they're not like us, and you know that. We all saw it in your eyes when Hugo was talking to us. You're scared of him, aren't you? The American hoisted her nose up and scowled at me. And you take that back right now, We're scared of Lloyd too, Nadine interrupted in a shaky, wobbly voice. Listen, Brenda, I know he's a person. Hugo's a person. Asher isn't claiming otherwise, and in much the same way, this world around us is Earth. But it's also not. I don't know how to explain it, but you know exactly what we're saying. Dominga nodded. Like it or not, we have to escape from this nightmare, Brenda. I don't know what will become of Hugo or Lloyd if we make it out of here, but we just have... Mom ain't supposed to say such a thing, Brenda said, rising to unsteady legs. You're all being ungrateful. We've got the lives of our dreams out here. Sure, our new loved ones set our hairs on end, but maybe that's just the price of admission. We ain't supposed to be playing this game after all. It wasn't made for folk like us. We just gotta keep playing, keep our wits about us, and be thankful that these ancients ain't killed us. Be thankful that they made this blessed game. Dominga huffed. I held up a hand for the Frenchwoman to take it easy, as I wanted to de-escalate the situation, and Brenda wasn't exactly thinking clearly. What wishes did everyone make? Freya asked.
I wish not to be lonely. I think I must have known that Papa wouldn't make it. I don't know how I knew, but I did. There followed silence, then she asked, "What about you, Asher?" I wished that Nadine and I would stay together, no matter what, I said, threading my fingers into hers. Nadine smiled at me. You know you didn't need to wish for that. Well, what about you? I asked her. Lloyd, she answered simply. Then she clarified. I wished that Lloyd would be safe, whatever happens to us. No matter what Brenda may think, I do love our son. The American lowered her head, avoiding Nadine's gaze. I wished for an answer that would get us out of this game, Dominga said. That may have been foolish. As Bomani told us, the game grants only feasible wishes, but I'm standing here alongside the rest of you, so I must have been spared the wrath of the gods. There are no gods here, Freya whispered ominously, staring out at the desert. Does anyone else see that? I followed her gaze and looked out at the wide stretch of desert, bordered on most sides by modern structures, but I squinted my eyes at an approaching speck, and it grew quickly from a speck to a blob, rippling slightly in the heat, the grey shape of something darting towards us. What is that, Freya? I asked, having a strange feeling that the girl knew. She shivered. He's here for me. And when the creature was only 100 yards away, scurrying yards nearer by the second, it became clear that it was a feline. He bore grey and white fur, striped with black on the legs. The wild look in his eyes became apparent as he halted about several yards before Freya, who was still kneeling in the sand. Oh, it's That's just an African wildcat, Dominga said, though she sounded a little uncertain. I thought it might be... I don't know what I thought. We're all on edge, Nadine said. It's just a wild animal, Fred. This doesn't mean anything. The Swedish woman shook her head, then reiterated. No, he's here for me. What makes you think that? I asked. Freya shrugged, refusing to look away from the cat's eyes. I feel the same when I look at him as I feel around Mama. He's a part of this game. He's not an inherently cold or cruel thing, but he's unnatural somehow. I wished to not be lonely, and he's here to keep me company. Well, that's a good thing, child, Brenda said with a smile. Makes me realize my wish wasn't needed. Dominga turned to the old lady suspiciously. What was your wish, Brenda? The American shrugged. Well, I was worried about Freya, you see, given what Sigvard said. Nadine raised an eyebrow. What Sigvard said? Brenda nodded, then made a casual admission that shook the group. Yeah, whilst we were standing at the back of the chamber and Freya was taking her turn. Oh, your papa was so upset, child. Anyway, he asked me to keep an eye on you. Well, something fell off. I had a bad feeling, you know, considering the way he said it, that he wasn't coming with us. So I knew Freya would need something to fill that hole. Every member of the group stood silently for a few moments, and I waited for Freya to blow up. I was certain that, though she hadn't blamed me, the girl would absolutely blame Brenda for her father's fate.
The old lady had sensed that something was wrong with Sigvard in the chamber, yet hadn't spoken up. Instead, however, the Swedish woman simply repeated Dominga's question, conveying an even deeper tone of suspicion. What was your wish, Brenda? Well, it was a little more specific than yours, dear, Brenda said. Then she nodded at the distant desert, at the fluctuating near-transparent wall of hot air warbling the sand. It seemed something else was coming. We all turned our heads to see another shape emerging from the distance, in the same direction from which the cat had manifested. The shape was taller and thinner this time. It was a figure, strolling towards us. Did you wish for Gordon? Nadine asked. Brenda shook her head. The man who abandoned our child? No, dear. Have some faith in me. I've got self-respect. Told you that I was only thinking about Freya in that moment. I wished for her. I wished for her mama. That final word triggered something in Frey, and she sprang up from her kneeling position in the sand. The African wildcat, which had been standing and facing the girl, twisted slowly and softly on its paws to face the approaching figure. It was Agneta. Freya reached roughly into her pocket, breathing rapidly, and pulled out her white pyramid. What are you doing? Dominga asked. The young Swede ignored the Frenchwoman and dropped to her knees. Then she shut her eyes up sharply and pleadingly, before saying, That isn't Mama. Those words left an icy tinge in my heart. And as I looked towards the woman approaching from the desert, I realized that we didn't want to be here when she arrived. That we should trust Freya's intuition. That this creature wearing her mama's face was not the real deal. She was a piece of the game, and she meant us harm. I dug my hand into my pocket and held onto my die tightly. Then I eyed Nadina and Dominga, in a way that instructed them to do the same. The two had clocked what Freya was doing, and didn't need to be told twice. Brenda, meanwhile, wore a clueless expression. She didn't seem to understand that none of this was real, that none of it was safe. Freya twisted her pyramid die into the sand, and the African wildcat released a disapproving hiss. Most hauntingly, Freya's mimicking mother hurried her strone, began to run towards us. I screamed as the disconcerting figure neared, and felt almost a sigh of relief when the sand finally collapsed below our feet, sending us back down into the pit of the chamber once more. I felt relief, most of all, that we hadn't been flung up into the sky. Relief that we were far from that unsettling animal, and the thing wearing the face of Agneta. One hellish fall later, we were lying in the bottom of that black chasm once more. There came loud whines and sobs from all around in the blackness, and I turned on my phone torch to desperately search for Nadine. When I found her sobbing in the sand, I let loose a sigh of relief and tightly embraced her. But the balls continued from all around us. Brenda? Croaked Dominga. Oh God. There were phone torches flitting all around the sand-filled underworld, and we turned to find Dominga shining her light on Brenda's right leg, on the bone jutting out of it, surrounded by blood. Freya, what were you thinking? Dominga shouted, after the Swedish woman had already slipped down the sandy slope towards the stone tunnel, towards the sacred game chamber at the end of it. Nadine and I walked over to Dominga, and the three of us scooped Brenda up. The old woman howled, and I tried my best to settle her. It's okay, Brenda, you're gonna wish this injury away, right? I said, as Dominga and I helped the old woman down the slope, with Nadine walking in front to keep Brenda's wounded leg elevated and safe from bumps against the sand.
Will that work? Dominga asked me as Brenda blubbered loudly. Would that count as a wish? Connected to the, I don't know, life stage of the game?
She was grunting heavily as we helped the old woman down the tunnel.
If it doesn't work, then we'll get her to a hospital.
Nadine puffed once we finally, successfully, hoisted Brenda down from the sand mound to the tunnel's mouth.
You're going to be okay. I want Hugo,
Brenda weakly wheezed.
You'll be with him soon,
I groaned as we rushed the lady down the tunnel as quickly as possible. Dominga groaned.
How could Freya do this? She nearly killed Brenda. She was frightened, I said. She wasn't thinking clearly, okay? Just let's not do this now. And she didn't even cry about her father, Dominga continued. The little girl's a psychopath. She's not a little girl, Nadine insisted, and she's not a psychopath. Freya wished for strength and bravery, and that's clouded her mind.
Dominga huffed.
Yeah, she's part of this place now, just like Hugo and Lloyd and all of us, I finished. Just like all of us. We've all been contaminated by the Little Pyramid game now. Well, there has to be a way to untangle ourselves from it, said Dominga. Which I might have been able to research if Freya hadn't thrown us back down into this hellhole. We'll just roll our dice again and head back to the surface, Nadine said. Then we'll be able to get to work and do our research. What if we don't wake up in the desert this time? Dominga said. What if we're tossed back to different ends of the earth?
Then we'll just have to meet back here, I said. It'll be okay.
And Brenda? Asked Dominga.
I shrugged. I only had to hope that, should the American materialize back in her Texan home, she would call for medical assistance immediately. Assuming that the new version of Earth would even have such things as hospitals and telephones. I was starting to fear that, soon, we would notice more changes in reality than simply the colours of our surroundings and the people standing beside us. Game Square 2 had looked awfully different from Game Square 1. How would Game Square 3 look, I wondered. I had to hope that Brenda would make a sensible wish. She would wish for herself to be healed, and she would hobble through the doorway and find herself completely better. Speaking of the doorway, when we reached the chamber we found that Freya had already gone through it. She was gone. We were fully intending to send Brenda through first, but there came an unexpected voice from the tunnel behind us.
Mom?
The American lady swiveled on her broken, bleeding leg, wincing as she did, and the rest of us scrambled to follow her, catching her body before she fell. The four of us faced an unexpected man standing in the tunnel's exit, right at the threshold to the chamber. Standing in the light of my phone torch was Hugo.
How the hell did he get down here?
Dominga whispered. I shook my head, but I don't like it.
Hugo, baby, are you okay?
Brenda asked, sobbing as we supported her weary body.
Me?
The young man asked, motioning at his mother's leg as he walked towards us.
What happened to you, Mom?
She smiled.
Just a little tumble, kiddo. Nothing too crazy.
There came scuffling, scurrying sounds behind Hugo, and I was reminded of those undead things I had seen time and time again in the black of that underworld tunnel. Things trying to end us before we could make it through the triangular doorway. Creatures created by the ancients themselves, no doubt.
What was that sound, Hugo? Asked Nadine.
Brenda's son shook his head. still smiling as he stopped a yard or so in front of us.
Nothing. Mom, where are you going? Are you going to make another wish?
Brenda nodded.
Yes. Well,
Then she pulled away from us and fell into her son's arms, sobbing with a mixture of euphoria and terror.
Oh, screw this,
Dominga said, turning towards the stone table and shaking the die in her hands. Then she eyeballs Nadine and me.
You two sort her out if you want, but I'm heading up to the surface. Don't just calm down,
Nadine pleaded, as the Frenchwoman rolled her die across the stone lid.
Aye,
Dominga said, scooping her little pyramid back up.
Yeah, aye. That should give me the insight necessary to beat this game, right? No more years of research. I just want the answer to this madness. That's what I'm manifesting, so that's what I'm going to find when I get up there.
Dominga, started Nadine again as she moved towards the woman, but I stuck an arm out and shook my head. You go too, I said, nodding at the white pyramid my girlfriend was squeezing tightly in her palm.
This all feels like deja vu,
said Nadine, nervously eyeing Brenda, the woman still tightly hugging her son in the entrance to the tunnel.
It seems that every time we move forwards a square on this game board, somebody gets left behind.
I nodded.
Yeah, and I don't want it to be you. I don't want it to be you, she said. You wished for us to stay together, Asher, so now you're getting exactly that.
With a sigh, I nodded again. Then the two of us turned our heads to the American woman being supported by her uncanny and untrustworthy son.
Come on, Nadine said. We've got to go, Brenda. You've lost a lot of blood and you need medical assistance now.
The woman smiled, not taking her eyes off Hugo.
They're right, honey. I'll see you on the other side, but this leg is... Oh, gee, it hurts. I need to get it sorted.
Do you? Hugo questioned in an odd tone. A tone that gave me goose pimples, much like the loudening scuttles from the other end of the tunnel.
Mom, you seem in better spirits already. You don't even seem to be in pain anymore.
Brenda smiled, looking down at her mangled leg, and she let out a little chuckle.
You know, kiddo, I kind of see what you're saying. Maybe it ain't that bad after all. I think I'm gonna be okay.
Brenda, said Nadine as the limestone tunnel began to groan, as if threatening to cave inwards.
Come on, what are you doing?
There's something down here, I whispered. Come on, Brenda. Let's go. The American's eyes focused a little, and she looked back to us with a frown.
I mean... Hugo... Maybe I should do what they say. The way out's through the doorway, see, and if I make a wish, things will be better for us.
Hugo stepped back from his mother, seemingly in a huff, but he nodded. And then the old woman turned to Nadine and me with a smile. The three of us started shaking our dice in our hands. I wished, in a similar vein to Dominga, but perhaps more in keeping with the game's rules, for my family to survive the horrors of the game. My family. The whole unit. Lloyd, Nadine, and me. By wishing for something within the game's second life phase, I hoped to not anger whatever force, sentient or otherwise, lurked within the mechanism of this supernatural world. Nadine and I rolled our dice at the same time, and as Nadine picked up hers, I turned to face Brenda. The American was standing right at the outer edge of my torch glow, looking down at the white pyramid in her hand. Hugo was still standing in the shadows of the tunnel's exit, huffing and grumbling to himself, for some reason that made no sense at all to me. Something was off about him, and I mean more off than normal. Then Brenda smiled and nodded firmly, as if having come to a decision. "Made your wish?" I asked, scooping up my die from the table. Brenda nodded. "Yeah, kiddo, I have." "Right, better make your roll then," I said, nodding at her like. "That injury's looking nasty." Brenda grinned warmly, and I held out a hand to help her away from the threshold between the chamber and the tunnel, and towards the playing table. "Always in a rush, ain't ye?" the American asked. "Just give me a jiffy, as you Brits would say, and I'll be right." Hands came all at once, came from the black of the tunnel beyond my torch beam. Countless sets of them wrapped around Brenda's waist, arms, and legs. She yelped as one clutched her bloody protruding bone, getting a firm handle on it, and then the disembodied hands dragged her into the darkness at unimaginable speed. The woman screamed, as did Nadine and me. "Brenda!" I bellowed, rushing forwards. The American's screams disappeared down the tunnel, towards the grumbling and scuttling and unnerving sounds which persisted in the distance. Something other than those undead things was down there. Something darker. Something at the very heart of the Little Pyramid game. Perhaps those very ancients who had created it. And then the scream stopped, having been swallowed by something. Something that made the very chamber quake. Something that made me stop running towards the tunnel. And that something was rushing towards us. A force large and unstoppable. "Asher?" began Nadine, standing near the triangular doorway. "Come on, we've made our rolls, let's go!" Then it came into the glow of my torch. A tidal wave not of sand, as I'd expected, but red bones. Blood-stained, meat-stained bones, gushing through every inch of the tunnel towards the chamber. Gripped by terror, I turned on my heel and dashed towards Nadine, who stood at the entrance to the triangular doorway, hand extended fearfully. And I felt the ocean of bones nipping at my heels as I tumbled, shrieking, through that black triangle into the unknown. I felt them cut into my skin. Nadine and I held hands in the black of the world between the doorway and the next square of the game board. And I felt certain that we had broken some rule, disrespected the game by entering the triangular archway at the same time. Given all that has happened since then, I am absolutely certain of this fact. I think some of the rules of the Little Pyramid game were left purposefully unspoken by Bomani. The black began to fill with light and colour as our eyes adjusted, and Nadine and I found ourselves in neither Giza nor London, standing in the dark of a field, eyeballing a cottage. There was no rhyme or reason to the places in which the game spit us out. I squeezed Nadine's hand. I'm sorry I couldn't save Brenda." She shook her head, eyes welling. "I'm just glad you're safe. Safe together. That was the wish I made, wasn't it?" "And what wish did you make this time?" Nadine asked. "For us to wake up somewhere new, perhaps?" I shook my head. "I wish for us to survive." "Us?" Nadine asked with wide eyes. "Lloyd, too?" I nodded. "We'll see him soon, sweetheart. Just as soon as we figured out this." And and then flitted a shape in the top window of the unlit cottage before us. It was revealed by a glint of moonlight reflecting off the glass. I jumped and gripped Nadine's hand tightly, and she flinched. "What?" she asked. I was about to nod at the house and tell her that something was in there, but then came a woman's shrill, piercing scream. Whispered Nadine, leading me forward by the hand. "Asha, this is her family's home. Sweden, that's where we are." I frowned, looking at the black countryside surrounding that tiny cottage. "How do you know that?" "Because I listened when we met her and Sigvard all those years ago," he said. "This is exactly how they describe their home. The cottage, the forest, and the mountains on the horizon." I didn't argue with her. It made sense. I took out my phone to light the way and we walked up the front path, comprising of disconnected paving slabs. We came to a stop at the door. As we did, I racked my brain and heart for some shred of courage or wisdom or both in the face of this unbeatable hell. But I came up short. So I turned myself instead into a blunt tool and began to barge my shoulder against the front door with Nadine's help. When it flew inwards along with the lock mechanism, which came free from the doorframe, we found ourselves eyeing the shivering form of Freya in the hallway. She was looking away from us. "Freya!" I hissed. "It's us." "Where?" she moaned, still looking away from Nadine and me. "What? In the doorway," I said. "Where?" Freya asked again. And then she began to turn, arms stretched outwards, searching blindly in the darkness. When she had fully turned to face my torch, Nadine and I both gasped in horror. Freya's eye sockets were bloody, pus-filled, hacked messes. Nothing capable of sight remained in them. And as Nadine opened her mouth to scream, I clasped it with my free hand. Freya, with seemingly attuned hearing, raised a shaky finger to her lips. "It's still here." There came shuffles from up the staircase, and I shot the torch towards the sounds. Then came a deeper, more primal set of screams from Nadine and me. Standing midway up the stairs was a figure, about 6 feet tall, with the legs and torso of a woman, and she wore a striking yellow sundress. But her head had been affixed clumsily to the fleshy neck, as if 2 differently coloured balls of clay had been mashed together. It was the head of the African wildcat. "Run towards my voice," whimpered Nadine with a hand stretched outwards. And Freya stumbled forwards, bumping into the wall, but she managed to find her way towards the front door where we waited for her. And then the girl's feline mother raised her own arm outwards, revealing nails with chunks of bloody flesh beneath, from the mauling she had inflicted upon her own daughter. We dragged the blind woman out of the front doorway, and the terrifying hybrid came hurtling towards us. I slammed the door, and dragged Freya with more urgency. "I wished for Mama and the cat to go away," she said as we ran away from the house, with Nadine and I holding her hands at either side. "Then I came home to find that monster." "Where do we go?" I asked as we ran across the field. I took a look over my shoulder and shivered at the front door to the house standing open. There was no sight of the unholy creature, but it had clearly slipped out after us. Freya panted heavily, pausing to take breaths as we sprinted. My father's car. It's at the edge of the property by the main road. We cut between towering trees, standing beneath a night sky too black to fully distinguish. It was impossible to know whether there lurked some other colour or other supernatural secret in that sky. I knew that soon the light of day would tell all. When we neared a beaten-up Ford Focus, I asked the obvious question. Please. Papa's been leaving them in the door, Freya said. There's nobody around to steal it. I took the keys out of the door lock and clambered into the driver's seat, whilst Nadine helped Freya into the back, and I twisted the key into the ignition and let the headlights burst to life. Let them illuminate that feline horror, standing in front of the gate to Sigvard's property. The three of us shrieked as I punched my foot against the accelerator and swerved past the terror in the road, which swung its large claws towards us as we crashed through the wooden fence beside the metal gate. And then we were on the road, cutting through the Swedish countryside towards something, anything, away from there. My girlfriend and I took Freya back to England and cared for her. It was a little crowded in our two-bedroom apartment. Nadine, Freya, Lloyd, and me. Not exactly the way of life I had in mind for us when I first agreed to play Bomani's game. Of course, when I first agreed to play Bomani's game, it had been just that. A game. Not something that would truly change the very foundation of our reality, would alter the very real trajectory of our lives. And those of us that remained spent months conducting research, finding any last scrap of evidence regarding ancient Egyptian elites and their game. A game kept hidden from even the pharaohs, who had their own ideas about life and what came afterwards. The Little Pyramid game was not bound to any religion. Bomani had been right. It was born of something else. Some ritual, very supernatural, yet very human. And if humans had made it, humans had to be able to unmake it. That was what I told myself. Unfortunately, Dominga proved to be no help. She'd gone silent online. Do you think her wish went wrong? Asked Nadine. Freya shrugged. She did tell us on the last square that she had asked for something infeasible. Bomani told us there would be punishments for that, didn't he? Let's not panic, I said. She'll talk to us when she's ready. I'm sure she's fine. It was only after 2 long, arduous years of silence that there finally came a message. We have to meet at the hotel, Dominga said. Where the hell have you been for 2 years? Asked Nadine. We were worried about you. I was doing my research, and I think I found an answer, but I had to be sure first. I'd love more time, but they're following me again. What about you? Have you seen them? I don't think so, I said. Either, Dominga replied firmly. I'll send you the details, and we'll meet there as soon as possible. When we arrived, she told us to come straight to the Great Pyramid of Khufu. Not to go near the hotel. She said she'd seen something there. Dominga doesn't sound right, said Freya. All the more reason to find her now, I replied. So we swerved the hotel and took a taxi to the pyramid. As dusk approached and the sky turned a brilliant shade of orange. A blood-red orange, which seemed to be the shade that had consumed most of the world in this new stage of the pyramid game. I'd certainly noticed a slight glint of crimson to our surroundings over the past 2 years, on this new, as Bomani would call it,
Game Square. Nadine, Freya, and I walked up to the spot, that old familiar spot by the edge of the pyramid, and there came a knot in my stomach. At long last, I felt that same sense of dread as Nadine and Freya, who we were guiding by hand. "Domingo ain't here," came a man's voice from the darkness. And then emerged a figure we hadn't seen in 7 years. A figure I certainly hadn't expected to see ever again. Gordon. "What have you done with her?" asked Nadine. "Me?" said Gordon. "What do you think I am? Some sort of murderer? Like that bastard who did this to us? I ain't done a thing, bitch." "Watch that tongue, Gordon," I asked politely. "Why were you messaging us from Domingo's phone?" "And how are you here?" added Freya. "You abandoned your wife and child on that first Game Square, and then I came to my senses," interrupted the American. "I kept making wishes, kept playing, until I found my way back to Brenda. Only what did I find? Nothing. She's gone. So I kept looking, went looking for that Domingo, to give that bitch a piece of my mind for entertaining Bomani in the first place. Only she's gone too, ain't she?" "What do you mean, gone?" Nadine asked. "I mean exactly what I said. Last wish I made. I found myself standing right in her apartment, and there she lay, on the ground, cold as the day. Something had got to her a long time before I showed up." "Oh," moaned Nadine. The whole thing made me unfailingly sad. Domingo had died all alone. She had been alone since the beginning. Back then I had Nadine, Brenda had Gordon, and Freya had Sigvard. Who did Domingo ever have? We had failed her. That was how I felt. And the worst part was I'd been so numbed by the endless, relentless horror of the experience that I didn't even shed a tear when Gordon gave us the news. I wanted to shed a tear, but my well was dry. "She had all of these papers," Gordon continued, "talking about things we could or couldn't do, and I thought you guys might be interested." "Well, tell us," Nadine said. "Tell us what you found." He shook his head. "Nah, not until you tell me what happened to Brenda. Tell me how to get to her." I sighed. "Gordon, Brenda you tell me she's gone, and I'll beat you to a pulp," the man snarled, approaching until he was but a foot from my face. "She ain't gone. I mean, did you see it with your own eyes?" "I saw Hugo," I said. "He and the other things dragged Brenda back into the I don't know." "Thank you, Asher," said Gordon. "That was all I wanted to know. So there you have it. Maybe you don't know, but I do. She ain't dead. She's fine. You didn't see it, so she ain't, right? And I've got a way to get back to her." "There's no way back," Freya said. "Bomani told us that." "Well, that ain't stopped you from trying to find a way out, has it?" said Gordon. "And if Domingo thought we had a way of escaping, then why the hell wouldn't there be a way of going back for my Brenda?" "What way back do you have?" I asked, folding my arms. Gordon pulled out an urn from his jacket pocket. "Domingo," he said, proudly displaying our old friend's ashes. Nadine bent forwards in hurl. Jesus, what's wrong with you? What are you going to do with that? Nadine asked, as I rubbed her back. Gordon frowned as if the answer were obvious. Sacrifice it, of course. I'm going to take it down into that chamber, right below our feet, and give it to the gods. Give her to the gods. Those ancients didn't want us playing their game, so if they see that we've sacrificed one of the peasants playing in their sacred world, maybe they'll show mercy on us. Maybe they'll see that we ain't too keen on being here either. You get me? They'll let us out. No harm, no foul. You're not actually that stupid, Freya scoffed. The American narrowed his eyes. Listen, kid, I ain't the one standing here with a mutilated face, so I'd say I've been a damn sight sharper in this hellhole than you. Just cool it, I warned him again, a little more firmness to my tone. Gordon sighed deeply and changed his tact. Look, I'm sorry, alright? The girl's dead. Ain't a thing we can do to bring back Dominga now. But we can try to change our own fates. Can't we? What harm is there in sacrificing her to that doorway, in that god-forsaken chamber, and seeing what happens? I bet that's what she'd want. Did Dominga actually find any research that would suggest this might even have the slightest chance of working? Nadine asked. Gordon shrugged and took out his white pyramid. Well, she seemed intent that we should try. And you all know that if she were here right now, she'd be pushing us all to go down there. You hardly knew her, Freya said. I heard the way she talked when we stayed at that hotel, before all of this happened, Gordon said. I know who she was. She explored the world because she wanted to see its secrets. That's what she was studying, wasn't it? Hell, maybe she already knew about the game. Maybe she wanted to find someone like Bomani who could lead her right to it. Well, now you're just fabricating a tall tale, I said. Maybe, Gordon admitted. But whatever the case, I'm going down to that chamber right now. Who the hell's coming with me? I looked at Nadine and she frowned, leaving it all up to me. I didn't much fancy letting Gordon go down there alone. I knew that he might ruin everything if we were to move to the next game square before us. He might leave us in some horrid position from which there would be no return. We'll all do it, I finally said. Freya nodded, trusting me blindly in every sense. The four of us clutched our pyramids as Gordon knelt and twisted his die a half-inch into the sand. Then came the tumble into that pit. It horrified me far less than it had the first or even the second time. In comparison to all of the other nightmares we'd experienced, it was relatively tame. A brief break from the hellishness of the rest of the ordeal we were forced to endure. When we reached the bottom, cushioned by that sandy mound, we turned on our torches and helped one another up. Even Gordon came to our aid, and I felt admittedly a little safer having another member of the group. Nadine and I escorting a blind lady on our own was hardly the symbol of a strong unit. We had lost so much since it all began. I'd become numb to death, in a way. And when we reached the chamber at the end of the tunnel, Gordon didn't hesitate.
I don't know who is behind all of this, he said to the ceiling above, earned tightly in his raised hands. But we bring you the body of one of our own, the girl who led us falsely into this pit. We don't want to play your game. We know we ain't worthy. So please, with her form, let us leave. Let us escape from your game. And then the man hurled the urn, containing Dominga's cremated body, through the black triangular doorway ahead of us. And there came, as I had unfortunately expected, nothing. Not a sound, not the heavens opening up. Certainly no exit from this hellish game. Hello? Gordon called out to nothing as he wandered aimlessly around the chamber. At least show me the way back to my Brenda, you bastards. I've wished for it, and you've given me nothing. I give you this sacrifice, and still you give me nothing. You give me nothing. You give me nothing. There was that temper again. Freya recoiled, and Nadine clutched her tightly. I didn't want to imagine what it must be like to be trapped in such a claustrophobic space with Gordon, of all people, and not have the gift of sight. Freya must have been terrified. That man was the sort of hulking, horrifying figure who one wanted to keep an eye on at all times. I know I did. I tried to calm him down. Gordon, let's just make our wishes, get back to the surface, and then we can put... And what? The man asked. Dominga knew more about ancient history, or how to research it, than any of us. What did she find after 7 years of looking into this shit? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Nadine started to shake her die, but I held up my hand to tell her to stop. Telling her to stop. Gordon was deeply unnerving me, and I feared that, should Nadine roll her pyramid, a deranged man might snatch it away from her. And those dice were the most important tools at our disposal. Right, Gordon said, speaking to the ceiling again. It's not enough, is it? The girl, she's not enough for you. You want all of them. Then the man charged at me, sending me tumbling to the floor, and I looked up at him in horror. Nadine rushed forwards with a scream, but Gordon elbowed her in the face, knocking her out cold. And I struggled against the man's broad hands as he wrapped them around my neck, struggled to let out an enraged shriek, enraged by the prospect that he had perhaps fatally hurt Nadine. I'm sorry, Asher, said Gordon, while squeezing the light out of my throat. For the record, I liked you. I think they will let me live if I get rid of all the illegals playing this game. You're illegal, I explained in an incredulous gasp, neck swelling as he strangulated me. They won't let you back to Brenda. They won't let you escape. They won't let any of us escape. You know, I lied, Gordon admitted deliriously. Dominga didn't know a thing, Asher. She didn't find a way to get us out of here. I just want to go back, that's all. I just want to be with my Brenda. I watched Freya feel around the chamber blindly, searching for us. And I tapped on the floor, next to a loose rock. Tapped firmly, choking out. Yeah, Brett. And Gordon was distracted for a second, seeing that I was trying to guide her towards the rock. This had been my plan. I hadn't really expected Freya to figure out what I wanted. I just needed him to let his guard down. And as he lifted his left hand ever so slightly from my neck, with a thumb poised in the air. I tilted my head forwards, opened my jaws, and took a bite. A large, vicious bite, straight through his thumb. I don't know whether I fully severed it with my teeth, but I know I tasted blood. A warm, thick flow of blood, filling my mouth, and the man instantly shrieked out, falling off me. I took the chance to thrust my knee into the old fool's gut, and then I pulled out from under him, before scooping a half-conscious Nadine to her feet. Whilst Gordon rolled on the floor in agony, clutching his thumb and his gut, Freya asked, "What's happening?" "Make a wish and roll your damn die," I told her, before slapping Nadine's cheek. Her temple was covered in blood, and she seemed concussed. "Wake up, sweetheart, we have to go." I directed the two women to the tabletop as Gordon screamed and cursed, rolling about on the floor, and the three of us rolled our dice. Then I practically shoved Freya and Nadine through the doorway. And as I went to join them, I felt a firm hand grip my bare arm. I twisted and met Gordon's fist, covered in blood from his mangled thumb. He missed the mark, my face, and caught my shoulder, but it was still a pound that left a growing welt, but it was still a pound that left a bruise. And as I staggered through the doorway, I felt Gordon try to join me, but my eyes widened. "No!" I warned. It was too late. Gordon's arm was jammed in the blackness, and I saw it spread over his face. The skeletal curse that had afflicted all of the untold, undead things we had seen in this hellscape. A blackness that took the left arm he had plunged into the doorway illegally. There was a sense of knowing in his black-veined, bloodshot left eye as I faded from the world. And as I did, I was thankful that I didn't have to see the end of his story, for I already knew it. He had stepped through the doorway without rolling his die, without making a wish. When I emerged on a long limestone walkway to find Nadine and Freya standing before me, I was initially thankful. Thankful that we hadn't spawned on opposite ends of the earth, forced to find each other, especially given Freya's lack of sight. Her vulnerability had been painfully obvious to my girlfriend and me, since we saved the woman from her home in Sweden. But when I took in the surroundings beyond the long platform on which we stood, I realized I had nothing for which to be thankful, as our environment was not one that even faintly kept up the pretense of being Earth, of being anything with even the illusion of comfort and nature. This was the game square I had long feared. The end. There was no ground beyond the suspended slabs on which we stood. The path hovered, without barriers, in an endless two-tone void of colours, endlessly swirling and bleeding into one another, like warring pigments of paint, an abyss of Egyptian blue and blood red. I twisted around to see not the black triangular doorway from which we'd come, but our pathway, tapering off into a fine point on the distant horizon. And ahead of us was mostly the same repeating hellscape, save for another triangular doorway that, I hoped, would bring some finality, would serve as an exit from this never-ending hell. "Hello?" Freya cried outwards, moving her arms in a blind search. Nadine ran forwards and grabbed the blind woman before she stumbled unknowingly over the edge of the walkway, and eternally tumbled through that blue and red nightmare chasm. I nodded at the doorway ahead. "That's our only option," I said. Nadine looked towards it and nodded, then the three of us began our tentative journey forwards, sticking very closely to the middle of the 3-meter wide walkway. One trip would send us into a forever nothingness, which was a haunting prospect. Though I had become accustomed to our disjointed surroundings on each game square, and the supernaturalism of our 7-year existence in the Little Pyramid game, there was something horrid about this world finally pulling off its mask. No more illusions, no more trickery. It was clear that this was not our world. We walked a half-mile, or perhaps only 50 meters. It was hard to say with any degree of certainty, given that place sat in juxtaposition to the real world, which we hadn't seen for so long. And as the three of us neared the triangular doorway ahead, I was initially grateful to see a soothing blue, not black, lying within it. But my ribs ached when I processed what I was seeing, processed the swirling splotches of white amidst blue. It was a sky. "Asher," began Nadine as she held Freya in place. "I know," I said, sliding in front of them. There was no door frame on which to cling. The triangle was a rip in the very body of reality. Or the very body of that reality. I inched closer and closer, then leant forwards to dip my head into the opening. And through it, I saw not the world beneath, as I had expected, but blue and clouds, endless blue and endless clouds, nothing but sky. I was about to say that we had to turn back and try another way, when there came a lurch in my belly, not only one of fear, but one of its contents shifting. I realized too late that the limestone walkway had slanted upwards, tipping our blue and red world, along with its contents, through the triangle opening, tipping us through the doorway. The three of us screamed. We were falling. Of course, in that game, it always felt as if we were falling. Falling from one game square to the next. And I had this dreadful thought, as I tumbled through the blue of the sky and the white of the clouds, I might come to miss that feeling. After all, this game wouldn't continue forever, would it? The falling would soon stop. The floor would come up to greet us. As we plummeted through a fluffy white puff of something vaguely resembling a cloud, though far denser than I had expected, I became aware that the speed of our descent was decreasing. The rush of wind past my ears was quietening. I finally heard the voices of Nadine and Freya with clarity. "Help!" cried the poor, sightless Swedish woman, who had no conception of her surroundings. To her, she was cascading through black. "Oh God!" Nadine screeched a little to my left, and I understood why when my plummeting body emerged from the cloud. Gone was the earthly sky, and back was that dark Egyptian blue, contaminated with red, as if the supernatural world had for a moment succeeded in imitating our world, only to forget itself again. The discrepancies and incongruousness of that game square's version of Earth only worsened below the clouds. In the blue and the red of this unnatural sky, there hovered enormous shapes, white glistening pyramids of the same breathtaking size as the true monuments in Giza. We fell past structures jumbled at all manner of angles in a geometrical jungle, as if lost to a child's toy box. The density of the air didn't let up, and our rate of descent lessened and lessened. It felt more as if we were falling through water than air. Then we were hardly falling at all. Much like the pyramids around us, we were suspended in the blue and red air, encased by dozens upon dozens of staggeringly large structures. Monoliths, threatening to crush us from all sides. Nadine and I swam over to Freya, and the sightless Swede jumped slightly as the two of us took her arms. "Please, tell me what's happening," Freya asked, struggling to maintain her composure, even with the strength for which she had wished so many game squares earlier. Nadine shook her head, casting teary eyes and a snotty face, the impossibility of our environment. It's... I don't know how to explain it, Frere. Sky and pyramids, and it doesn't even look like Earth anymore. We've known that for a long time, Frere said calmly, before wiggling her legs as if treading water. What are we... Why... Are we in the sea? On land? I don't get it. Neither do I, Nadine moaned. The two continued talking and comforting one another, whilst I swiveled in the thick, sludgy air to answer our questions. As I eyed the many pyramids above, below, and to the sides of us, I clocked a distant sound. Tapping. It was, to my hearing, like some heavy metal chiselling away at stone, though I had no idea how my ears would be attuned to such a thing. I'd only ever been a sales associate and a failed writer, not anything even adjacent or tangential to a stonemason. My gaze eventually locked upon the upper vortex of a pyramid to our left, its tip jabbing forebodingly at my eyeline. Its topmost pointed cutting of limestone had been chipped free. The dislodged block floated into the warty, airy abyss in which we were swimming. That mammoth-sized stone had come free to reveal a black hole, large enough for us to enter, and I opened my mouth to tell Nadine and Frere. Then I saw it. An eyeball large and compressed, as if flattened to a shape that would allow it to peer through that rectangular opening. It bore a familiar brown pupil in its centre. And I was about to scream for the other two to swim away, scream in terror at this godlike thing, which was poising to break free of its pyramid prison, to swallow our three helplessly flailing bodies in its gigantic jaws. Nadine screamed first. And when I turned, expecting her to see what I'd seen, I instead found another horror. She was looking up at the clouds from which we had fallen. I gawped at the thing clawing its way downwards towards us, fighting against the thick, resistant air which was slowing its fall. Only one of its arms functioned, and the other, black and charred, hung limply by its side. Once I saw its half-decayed face, the shade of charcoal, I knew the thing was, unmistakably, Gordon. What remained of Gordon. My eyes shot back to the opening at the tip of the pyramid, and I felt relieved to find only blackness. The titanic eyeball was gone. "This way!" I yelled at Nadine, swimming a couple of strokes over to her. I wasn't thinking about the dangers in the pyramid, the danger swimming down towards us, the American who had fated us to this hellhole. I grabbed one of Frere's arms, and Nadine grabbed the other. I didn't know whether we were swimming directly into the open maw of some unfathomably large and undead creature to whom that eye belonged. But I knew Gordon was real. I knew we had to escape. And I knew, should he reach us, we would meet some horrible end. I made the mistake of looking up momentarily, and groaned as I saw his open, drooling lips. A hybrid of red and black, life and death. His bloodshot, black-veined eye seemed to carry the rage that man had barely concealed in life. Only it had been amplified to a paranormal and inhuman degree. Whatever had happened to Gordon when he came through the black triangular doorway, without rolling his die, it had robbed him of any humanity left in his husk of a body. I knew we shouldn't blindly swim into the black of the pyramid, but we had no better option. It was either face whatever terrifying fate Gordon, in his half-dead form, had in mind for us, or face the unknown of the Great White Pyramid ahead. And as we entered the blackness, with that man's sickly breath on our heels, I grunted painfully, exerting all of my remaining strength to get the three of us through that hall before him. I expected another tumble, as tumbles seemed to be the mode of transportation through the otherworldly hellscape of the Little Pyramid game. In much the same way I expected Gordon's hands to wrap around us at any moment. Instead, there came a gentle tipping of my body's innards, and the gentle approach of something firm below my feet. There came also immense calm and quiet and stillness. Nadine, Freya, and I had landed softly and upright on a floor, and Gordon hadn't followed. I looked up to see the outline of that monstrous man hovering above the hole at the top of the pyramid. I didn't like any of this. Calmness before a storm only gave my body time to drain itself of adrenaline, only gave my senses time to dull. And a blunt mind, as evidenced by my fallen friends over the years, was ill-equipped to deal with the nightmare of this game. Ill-equipped to survive. When no light emerged in that black place, I took out my phone and turned on the torch. Nadine and I were both visibly and audibly taken aback. A white limestone maze stood before us, and the sloping ceiling of the pyramid rose above. Freya clearly didn't like the sounds we had made. "What?" she asked. "What is it now?" Nadine replied, "There's a maze." "Of course there's a maze," Freya said, with a tone that sounded slightly firmer again. There was that strength on which Nadine and I had come to depend. "Are we going to enter it then?" "When do we ever deny the game its wishes?" I asked solemnly. Guided by my torchlight, and Nadine's hand on the right side wall of the maze, the three of us pushed down the entry path. I thought back to a time, long before the Little Pyramid game, when Nadine and I had visited a maze at a lovely English park. She had skillfully led the pair of us through the twists and turns to the gazebo at the centre. I trusted her sense of navigation more than mine. I was useless at that sort of thing. Nadine, the girl with the PhD in mathematics and the job as a data analyst, had a brain wired for puzzle solving. "Right," she said, when we reached the dead end a few turns later, but she kept her right hand against the limestone and followed the surfaces of the three walls, exiting back out to the route from which we'd come. "Not to worry, we'll keep going." "That's a neat trick," I said with a smile as we backtracked. "I remember what it used to be like in escape rooms." "Let's just focus on getting out of here, Asher," said Nadine drearily, hardly even a shell of her former self. But Freya asked curiously, "What was she like in escape rooms?" Nadine sighed. "Freya, we need to just get on with this, and you need to keep talking to me," the Swedish girl finished for her. "Remember that I'm walking in the dark here, so I need to keep my mind active, okay? Go on, Asher. Tell me, what was she like?" I smiled, eyeing Nadine's stern and lost face, and hoping to bring a little colour back to it. "She tore a mirror off a wall, trying to find a clue." Nadine scoffed. "I did not tear the mirror off the wall." "She did," I said. "The manager fined us for it." Freya giggled for the first time in 2 years. "That doesn't sound like you, Nadine. You're always so level-headed." "Not when she's solving a puzzle," I said. "The next time we did an escape room in that place, there were stickers on objects reading, 'Do not remove.'" "That had nothing to do with me," Nadine said. but a slight grin tickled the corners of her lips, and I felt, for the first time in a long time, a sense of joy. All I'd ever needed in the world was not my own happiness, but hers. The love of my life opened her mouth again, as if ready to say something, and from the rosiness of her cheeks and the glint in her eyes, I was certain it would be something good and pure, something human, after 7 years of inhumanity. Nadine never got to say whatever she was going to say, because there came a sound which stunned the three of us into silence and halted us in our tracks. A shrill, distorted shriek. So close to human, but mixed with a hint of something else. It reminded me of the tabby cat back home, who would sometimes create a racket by our bins at night, perhaps caterwauling for Nadine or me to open a lid and treat it to the rotting snacks inside. I saw Freya grip Nadine's arm. "No," she said, and with that one singular frightened utterance, I knew. I understood what we had heard from somewhere deep within the labyrinth of stone. It was that familiar, feline sound. Creature we had seen in Freya's home. "Come on," Nadine said, using a shaky hand against the wall to veer us right. I knew her method was one of the finest for solving a maze, and I didn't want to contest that, but I had an awful feeling about it. Had an awful feeling that we were barreling towards the thing we had heard in the darkness. "Not that way, please," Freya suddenly pleaded, as Nadine's hand against the right-hand wall threatened to turn us down a second right-hand route. Nadine frowned as she was stopped by the Swedish woman, planting her feet resolutely against the floor. "Freya, we have to do this properly or we'll get lost." Freya shook her head. "No, it's a dead end that way. You have to trust me." "Well, if so, we'll keep following this wall with my right hand, and it'll lead us straight back out," Nadine promised. "That's how it works. That's how we get to the center of the maze." Then the Swede shook her head more forcefully. "Trust me, Nadine. That's a dead end, and we don't want to go down it. You must hear it. Freya trailed off, and Nadine and I, with our ears not quite as sharp as those of the blind woman, finally heard approaching footsteps. Softly padding against the sand below our feet, but clearly coming from the alleged dead end to the right. The other option was to keep walking onwards, so I nodded towards it and looked at Nadine. "That way then?" My girlfriend didn't put up a fight. She nodded and we pushed forwards. Nadine and I firmly held Freya's arms and hurried her past the right-hand turning. "Don't look," recommended Freya in a whisper. But it was too late for such wisdom. I'd already instinctively twisted my head to the right, glancing down the turn we could have taken, and if I'd seen my skin in that moment, I would have seen pale white. I'm sure of it. Shuffling slowly towards us, in a yellow sundress, was that feline-human hybrid of Freya's half-mama. I stifled the scream and the vomit, trying to push out of my throat. Then I hurried us along, before Nadine had a chance to see what I'd seen. Perhaps she had already seen it in her peripheral vision, as her lips seemed to squeeze together more tightly, and the three of us scurried forwards at an ever-increasing pace. Nadine's hand was barely clinging to the right-hand wall anymore. Of course, that didn't seem to matter much, as there was no junction ahead. The maze veered left, and I could sense, given the lack of options, that we were approaching the center. Approaching the end. When we rounded that next corner, we eyeballed a raised stone platform with a familiar-looking table in its center. It was an open-walled version of that ancient sacred chamber we had visited so many times beneath the sands of Giza. We had reached the end of the game square. The end of the game? Nadine and I kept Freya pointing directly ahead, though that was the only help she needed. She was perfectly capable of sprinting at great speed, and the three of us moved in a tightly knitted formation, squeezing down that final passageway towards the maze's heart. I was praying for a way out of this nightmare, much as with every wish, though doing so had only buried me deeper and deeper and deeper in that unending hell. This time had to be different, I told myself. It was the only thing which kept me going. A handful of meters away from the maze's center, Freya released a yelp of surprise and went tumbling to the ground. As capable as she may have been on her quick, youthful feet, she'd been blind to a rather large and loose rock in the path. It felt to me like a malicious rock, left specifically in the blind girl's way to obstruct her, to trip her up. This whole game had been designed with insidious intent. Nadine and I were already on the stone platform by the time we slowed our sprints to turn and face the girl. And inexplicably, without the sound of approaching feet or her cat-like paw, that abomination of a feline hybrid had appeared directly above the fallen girl. It loomed tall in the yellow sundress, arms outstretched and blood-coated fangs bared from her fur-coated face. "Mama?" called out Freya from the ground, reaching a hand blindly upwards in some hopeful way. The creature extended its own hands towards its once daughter. And I hoped, for a second, that all would be well, that some of Mama might have survived in there, might still see her child. But the feline horror's hands did not help Freya to her feet. They wrapped around her neck, nails elongating into claws. "Oh!" cried Nadine as she lunged forwards. But I caught her shirt and pulled her back. The claws actioned quickly, making light work of Freya's face. Actioned so quickly that the Swedish daughter's scream faded into silence within a half-second as the unholy creature severed the blind woman's head from her body beneath. I clutched Nadine in fear, watching as Freya's limp, decapitated body fell to the ground. The hell did not end there. The feline tossed its daughter's lifeless, bloody, separated head to the ground. Then it lifted its sharp claws towards its own neck, and it began to pull at the fleshy, furry stitches connecting its African wildcat head to its human body beneath. There was no cry of agony from the creature, though Nadine and I unleashed loud enough screams to compensate. The headless woman simply knelt beside her daughter's equally headless corpse, and then started, in a scene of terror, to affix its feline head to Freya's decapitated body, lying atop the sand. "Don't," begged Nadine weakly. But the mother's headless body fell limp, yellow sundress crumpling atop it. And most horrifyingly of all, Freya's corpse, now topped with the very African wildcat she had been so desperate to escape years earlier, sat upright and faced us with those terrifying feline eyes.
I pushed Nadine behind me, staring in abject horror at the abomination as it tilted its head, as it eyed me curiously. I prepared to finally meet an end, praying only that Nadine would find some form of exit, would survive along with our son. That was the wish I had made before we entered this final game square. Then came the tumbling of the world around us. The maze, the pyramid, and all other than the stone platform on which we stood, crumbled away. And the feline hybrid, now half Freya, screeched out as it fell into the abyss below, along with the disconnecting blocks of the pyramid ceiling above. Nadine and I held each other, and I hoped the stone roof of the maze's gazebo heart would protect us from the falling rubble of the disintegrating structure. "I love you," Nadine blubbered. "I love you too," I replied, compressing her to my body as the stone platform quaked. The maze's walls and pyramid's blocks cascaded, crashed and broke against the roof of our small sanctuary. But our stone platforms stood, or rather, floated, in the great abyss, in the red and blue void once more. There was nothing around us, nothing in that reality, the small, hovering chamber with its stone roof and lidded box. But there was no triangular doorway, no more wishes to be made. This had to be it, the end. It had to be. "You will not find the ancients here," came a voice from behind us. We both spun to find a man sitting at the edge of the stone platform, legs dangling into the great pit of red and blue. A man who hadn't been there before. He wore a leather jacket, stained red on its back, much like his scraggly brown hair. "Bomani?" I said. "Not anymore," he replied, whilst turning to face us. Nadine and I recoiled at the man's blood-soaked face, at the undead thing, all that remained of the man Sigvard had long ago thrown from that sand tunnel, down a long drop towards his painful demise below. Just like everything, he had become undead. "You won't find the ancients here," Bomani repeated, eyeing me in that strange way again, as if this was something I should already know. "You were hoping to meet them, weren't you? Hoping to bargain your way out of here. But they wouldn't dare step in this contaminated version of their sacred game. This game, which has been your home for 7 years, is the world of what Gordon called illegals. I suppose there is no better way to put it." I took Nadine's hand, and that made Bomani smile. "The two of you are together, just as you wished." "Good. That's good." "Why did you do this to us?" I finally asked. "I know Gordon insulted you, but we didn't." Bomani shook his head. "You have blamed me for so long. I didn't bring you down here. Don't you understand yet? This is a loop. There is no beginning, no end. How could I have chosen to bring you here?" "What are you talking about?" I said. "There was a time before this. A time before you. A time before we came to Egypt. A time before we came to that hotel. A time before you sat beside us and introduced us to the game." "Was there? Was there really?" Bomani asked. "Really think about it, Asher, because I don't remember it." And that broke me. I realized he was right. That was impossible. There had to have been a point at which we entered the time loop. A time when life was normal, back in England, before we met Bomani. Nearly 3 decades of life. I knew he was wrong, he had to be wrong, but even as we were sitting in that hotel all those years ago, playing our silly little game of life, I had already seen things, hadn't I? Shapes and figures and colours from the 7-year-long Little Pyramid game. Things which would suggest we had already been playing Bomani's game before we even decided to do so. Impossible. All of this was impossible. I knew I remembered the time before, so why was my mind telling me otherwise? Why was my gut telling me otherwise? Everything must have a beginning. Everything must have an end. That's impossible. No, you gave us those toy pyramids, I said, before fishing mine out of my pocket and showing it to the man accusingly. There was a start to all of this. There was, otherwise where did we come from? We materialized out of thin air? You did this to us. Stop lying. A tear spilt from Bomani's eye. A real tear. And that horrified me. For if he weren't the villain, the orchestrator of our nightmare, then that only created another unknown. Another hellishness that would never be explained. Who was responsible for this? None of us chose to be here, Bomani said. Yes, I inherited this game from my ancestors, but they cursed me somehow, for some reason I do not know. I didn't choose those pyramids. I didn't choose to come over to your table. I didn't do this. Perhaps we did somehow exist before this, in another life, in another timeline. I don't know. But I know I don't remember. Anyway, believe what you wish. No matter what you may think, there always has been, and always will be, the loop. I replied with a shake of my head. No, the game's coming to an end. We're gonna die like the others, and this'll finally be over. Were you ever listening to me, Asher? No one really dies here, said Bomani. In the pure game, the game of the elites, such immortality was a blessing, some version of heaven, perhaps. And that makes this hell, does it? Asked Nadine. Bomani nodded. I suppose it does. Each afterlife is eternal. Ours is simply an eternal torture. There came the grind, and the tabletop behind us shifted open, causing Nadine to practically jump into my arms. What's happening? I asked. For what it's worth, Bomani began. I'm sorry. Something heavy slid across the soles of my trainers, and I looked down to see that stone was covering them, binding me to the platform. I tried to shift my feet, but they were concreted in place. Nadine's eyes widened. What have you done to him? She cried, before pointing to the askew tabletop. Just let us roll our dice and make our wishes, then we'll get out of your hair, okay? Oh, you still don't know, do you? Bomani asked her, forecasting his teary, undead eyes to me. But you know, don't you, Asher?
Nadine turned to me with a quaver.
What does he mean?
I sniffled. We've made 5 wishes, Nadine. We've reached the end of the game. Like I said, I just want him to let us die now.
No, she said. No, I don't want to, Asher. I don't want to die.
She checked her own shoes, which were unbound to the stone. Then she looked to Bomani.
What have you done to him? Why is he stuck there?
Bomani lowered his eyes. For so long, and so short, I have watched all 7 of you play this game. Over and over and over. In the past, present, and the future. The loop. The never-ending loop. At all times, in all places. And this moment, right here and right now, never fails to break my heart. Neither of you deserve it. Even Gordon, for all of his crass words, didn't deserve what... The man was interrupted by a sudden long, charred arm emerging from the playing table. A table that had clearly always been a sarcophagus. And out crawled the creature which had pursued us from the past square. The undead, half-burnt thing that used to be Gordon. It snapped its bent, undead limbs into place, and I screamed, unable to free my feet from their stone casings, as the being strolled towards Nadine. She screamed as the man seized her shoulders, firmly fixing her in place, and my knee and ankle joints cracked painfully as I swung forwards, but I wasn't able to get any closer to them. "Gordon," I started, reaching outwards in great pain as Nadine tried to outstretch her own hand towards me. She was constricted. Our fingers didn't meet.
"Gordon, please don't do whatever you're doing. Please."
The undead thing ignored me, seemingly not understanding a word from my lips, seemingly no longer acting of its own volition, but acting instead in accordance with the game, with the unspoken, unwritten, unknown rules of the Little Pyramid game. A game that, by Bomani's own admission, had never really been a game at all, but a ritual of the ancients. A ritual not built for illegals like us. I bawled as the half-charred man began to smear some unknown black substance across Nadine's visible skin, across her face and arms and legs.
"Why is this happening?"
I asked anything or anyone that might answer. "You wished for your family to survive," Bomani explained as he wept.
"Don't look, Asher. I'm telling you, don't look."
But I'd already seen Gordon dip his charred, black hand down Nadine's screaming mouth. And as the arm dipped impossibly deep, disappearing down her throat and into the pit of her body, my girlfriend's eyes began to twitch, and her screams started to die. Then they were extinguished. And as I wailed and sobbed and screeched incoherently for something to stop all of this, nothing answered. Not even a wish made from my toy pyramid would have stopped any of it. I understood that. From Nadine's throat, the undead man removed her organs. His large hand wrapped around her livers,
kidneys, intestines, and all else. He plucked them out, one by one. And then, using his long nails, he chipped away pieces of her skeleton and dropped them by Bomani, who begrudgingly shaped them as if they were pieces of clay into a tiny pyramid. Then he lined that pyramid up against 7 others. 8, all in all. 1 for each of us, including him. A pyramid made from each of our bones. Because we were, and always had been, in a loop. I became despondent as Nadine was mummified alive, and her limp body was tossed into the sarcophagus. That was what it had always been. I'd known that, really. The lid was pushed into place by Gordon afterwards, and I watched with a numb, tear-strewn face as he walked off the edge of the stone platform. The half-human creature dropped out of sight into the red and blue abyss. And something came to me. Another horror I wish I hadn't realized. Nadine and that black, undead corpse. They had always been one and the same. She was the mummified creature that had been stalking us since the very beginning. The thing that came for us in the tunnel. The thing that held Lloyd's shoulders lovingly in the apartment. The thing that watched from countless corners of countless places. Including, impossibly, at the hotel, before we even started the game. Bomani was right. The loop made no sense. There had to have been a time before we played. A time before the hotel. A time when we were normal people back in England, but there wasn't. There had only ever been the loop. My head and my heart hurt. She will live forever, Asher, and you will too, Bomani said. You are everlasting, thanks to your wish that your family should survive. I don't want this, I hoarsely said. I want to die. You said this would end. I said life ends, Bomani explained. Not the game. This game is cursed, I said. Bomani looked away at the red and blue void surrounding our stone platform, which still hovered in the middle of nothingness. I'd be careful with your words, Asher. You've disrespected the ancients by playing at all, so don't disrespect them by laughing in the face of their gift. Gift, I repeated, sobbing as I thought of Nadine. Living forever with your family, is that not any person's dream? Asked Bomani. Dreams, reality, I no longer know the difference, I whispered absent-mindedly, eyes drifting as I prayed to the red and blue abyss for a way to die, a way for my pain to end. No, Bomani, I have not known peace for a very long time. Every night, for the past 7 years, my dreams have been nightmares. But perhaps worse still, not all of my nightmares have been dreams. Bomani stared into the abyss and nodded. So what will you do next? I nodded weakly at the sarcophagus. Won't I join her in there? Isn't that how I become immortal? Surviving along with the rest of my family? I wished for us to stay together, after all. Bomani shook his head. That isn't how you stay together, Asher. That isn't how this whole thing loops. You must continue playing the game. But I've made all 5 wishes, I said. The game's over. He shook his head, then twirled his index finger to indicate a loop. It's not over. Not for those wise or unwise enough to seek immortality. I told you, there are different ways to play this game, Asher. And you've chosen the way of the ancients. That grants you an extra wish. A wish within reason, of course, as always. This was all an accident, I said. I know, Asher, but we are powerless against the ancients. They are gods. I felt the weight on my shoes lift, and I looked down to see that I had been freed from the stone. I fished the toy pyramid out of my pocket, then eyed it in my palm. What if I don't play? I asked. Omani shrugged. Sure, stay here forever. Does that mean they won't suffer? I asked, nodding at the sarcophagus. Nadine and Lloyd? I don't think you understand, Asher. When you roll that die, you get to be with Nadine again. From the very beginning. An idea came to me. So I could change things. Yes, you could anger the ancients, Bomani interrupted. Sure, but a far greater eternal torture would await, and I know you don't want that, Asher. I know you want the best for your family, and I'm telling you that the best way you can give your family is the loop, is to keep doing things in exactly the same way. That is the best option. But not for that undead version of my wife, I said. The mummified creature that still remembers it all. No, not for her, Bomani agreed. But for the living and breathing Nadine you will see again. Life doesn't have to be all pain and suffering. 7 years of bliss could be yours. Bliss? I asked incredulously. You think it was bliss? More blissful than my existence, Bomani said, eyeing his withering, decomposing hands. I've been dead an eternity, Asher. A timeless length of time. No beginning and no end, remember? All of this is forever happening. All 5 squares of the game, so to speak, are being played at all times. On and on and on. So what wish am I supposed to make? I asked, eyeing the die in my hand. It's a loop. It's all already been decided for me. Everything's happening at all times, you said. You already know what I'm gonna do. What wish could I possibly make that would change anything? One extra move, Asher, said Bomani. One last stage of your life cycle before it starts again. One last chance to do something great. And you already know what I'm going to do? I asked. He nodded. I do, because you've already done it. There came a pang in my stomach as I tried to wrap my head around the horror of being trapped in an infinite loop of torture, forced to watch my loved ones die again and again, with no way of truly dying, for the game wouldn't allow it. And that got me thinking about what the game would allow. Wishes within the context of its rules, its categories: personal development, family, and retirement. What if I make a wish that develops me as a writer? I asked. Bomani nodded, hinting that I was on the right path. Not that it mattered, as my decision had already been predetermined, which came with the existentially horrifying truth that there was no free will for me in that place. Okay, so I want to write my story. I want to write about what I have experienced in the Little Pyramid game, I said. Bomani nodded again, motioning his hand for me to continue letting the cogs turn in my mind. I want to stop anyone else from ever being duped into playing this game, I said. And I want to get that message out into the real world. My story would be a way of doing so. But this isn't the real world, is it, Asher? Said Bomani. Even if you publish your version of events as a successful novel, you'll be publishing it in this game's version of reality. That wasn't what I wished, I interrupted. Bomani smiled, seemingly content that I had figured things out. No, it wasn't, was it? Your wish is to be the most successful writer on the planet. Am I right? You hear all of my thoughts? I asked. He shook his head. I've heard and seen only ever what the game has wanted me to hear and see. Remember, you and I have been here before, and we will be here again. Right, well, if I want my story to get out there to people in the real world, what do I do? Bomani frowned as if I were an imbecile. Wish for it, of course. And that'll work? I asked, looking around the chamber. There's no doorway anymore. Well, as I said, we're not connected to the real world anymore. We simply have to hope. I nodded. I want to make sure nobody ever suffers this twisted game of the ancients again. This ritual is wrong. It's twisted and it's... Bomani silenced me with a finger to his lips, and he looked around in fear. Did he know that someone or something was forever watching and listening? I'm not going to say whether I agree or disagree, Asher, he said. But watch your tongue. There are worse fates than you know, and none of them involve an end to your existence. Either make a wish or endure eternal torture. It is your decision. I nodded, eyeing the die. A decision that I've already made, apparently. Don't try to understand it, Bomani advised. I squeezed the die in my hand. I suppose I ought to write down my version of events then. It'll be a long tale. Bomani tapped his temple. You've written it up here, Asher, 1,000 times in 1,000 places. As I said, you need only wish for it, and your story will find its way to the real world. We hope. And as I looked at the die, I made the wish. I rolled. Then I eyed the 3 faces on the top, and prepared to make my decision. Just know that the game won't like this, Bomani cautioned. You need to take the gamble, Asher. You need to choose the fourth face. Remember, that is always the perfect solution. It is always the way to guarantee a wish. And I think it may be the only way for your story to get out into the real world. I smiled arrogantly. Well, of course I'll pick the fourth face. You already know how this all goes. You already know the gamble pays off. I'm not worried. Bomani shook his head. No, Asher. I know only what happens within our loop. I don't know whether your story ever makes it beyond this place. You and I will never know. We will only know whether the game ultimately punishes us for it. I gulped. But whatever option did I have? I had to do it. I chose the fourth face. It displayed the eye symbol, and I prayed that the risk would bring a fruitful result, that I would succeed in my mission to warn all of you about the horrors of the Little Pyramid game. And as I prepared to ask Bomani where I would find the triangular doorway, I screamed. My fingers were sinking into the eye symbol of the bone-built die. And then sunk my arm and my head and my entire body, as impossible as that may be, into that miniature pyramid. My body shrank and stretched out of shape, and I found myself not falling, but watching lights and colours and shapes flash past my eyes. Impossibly, I was typing this story, with the blinding light of a computer monitor blazing against my eyes. I saw into your world, the real world, my old world that I missed so dearly. But I'm grateful for those seconds of reality as I typed and posted and typed and posted the many parts of this story for all of you. I typed my cautionary tale in the hope that it would prevent others back on Earth from meeting the same fate as me. Perhaps the true gamble, brought about by me picking the fourth face of the die, is whether any of you will actually heed my warning, even if you do read or listen to my tale. When all of the dizzying lights had passed, I was sitting in a chair at a table by a hotel pool, surrounded by the laughing faces of my friends. The laughing, oblivious faces of those I had once known. Those I would know again. Nadine was there. My beautiful Nadine. I held back the tears, and I thought about telling my friends all about the horror coming our way. Thought about trying to change our fates. But I remembered Bomani's warning, his promise of a far worse fate awaiting me, and far more terrible torture for my family. Should I interfere with the sanctity of the loop? Should I defy the game? But this time was different. I remembered the last iteration of the loop. Does that mean something? Will I find a way out of this? The way Bomani looked into my eyes by that pool, as he explained the rules of the game to us, I realized that he knew. He remembered the events of the loop, and he knew that I knew. He was as much a prisoner as me. He had always been. We are fated, for all eternity, to suffer